There are two powerful families in the Empire. The first, House Schutz, filled with renowned, fearsome warlords. The second, House Kleider, a family of merchants that stood atop the pinnacle of commerce. If combined, their powers would eclipse the imperial family itself. And at one time, the heads of these two families were even close friends. But 10 years ago, the Duke and Duchess of House Kleider fell from a cliff and died. When Duke Erhard Schutz learned of the incident, he rushed to the scene of his friend's death, finding their bodies and child's clothes. He scoured the northern territories, but wasn't able to find their missing child. Then, 10 years passed, and he stood before the male lead, Damien, saying, "I'll adopt this child." This was happening just like what happened in the story. She promised to help him find his family so she wouldn't get kicked out of the orphanage. She remembered that according to the story, Damien would fight alongside Duke Schutz in the war that would break out in 4 years, then meet Ashabel, the female lead, and live happily ever after. However, she'd be startled. She wasn't expecting the Duke to say she was to become his daughter-in-law. She couldn't believe this. At that time, the Empire had emerged victorious in a number of wars, both large and small, causing money to flow through the lands in torrents. The nobles were eager to spend their wealth to flaunt their riches and show off their spirit of generosity to the world. That was when they started adopting orphans who lost their parents through war. But things were not as they seemed. Ellie knew their directing caretaker only fed and bathed them to impress the nobles. Otherwise, they wouldn't. To secure donations, the orphanage director only accepted good-looking orphans, and Ellie was one of those children. But the director overlooked one crucial detail. Her mother was an infamous thief who was hanged when she was caught stealing from a distinguished count. No one would willingly take the daughter of a thief. So she was back at the orphanage today after being abandoned by her adoptive parents for the third time. Getting into a carriage accident on the way back, she remembered this world was a story from a book, and that in the world she lived in before, you could create objects and control people with the flick of a wrist. She had worked to realize the implications of this concept, and while her memories were hazy, she knew she was deeply attached to her work. The only thing she didn't understand was why out of all the books she read, this was the only one she could remember, while still not being able to recall its title. Staring at the director's angry expression, Ellie surmised she likely lost money gambling again. She noticed a new kid standing beside the director, and with him being introduced as Damien, Ellie knew who he was. The male lead and future hero who defeats the Emperor. And this made her the character who bullies him and gets kicked out of the orphanage. Ellie was one of the villains of this story. Damien, the male lead, lived a miserable life. His father, Duke Kleider, headed the Empire's foremost merchant guild, and their house was so influential that some say it was more influential than the imperial family itself. The Emperor grew envious of House Kleider and killed them secretly, and the Duke's final will and testament was written as though he had known the accident would occur, where in writing, Duke Kleider left all his family wealth to his one and only friend, Erhard. It didn't take long for Duke Erhard Schutz, who ruled the barren monster-infested north, known as a bloodthirsty killer, to become the target of avarice. The Kleider family felt disdain that being flesh and blood earned them nothing from their dead relative. All the while, Erhard was single-minded, seeking his best friend's son, claimed to be the spitting image of his father with black hair and blue eyes, endlessly searching the forest full of monsters. Ellie knew that despite Damien living a life as a slave, he'd survive thanks to male lead plot armor. The director would leave him behind shortly, and Carson, the oldest orphan at 13 years old, already scoffed at the idea there'd be less to eat with another mouth to feed. He and a group of boys began to bully Damien, but Ellie knew they'd come to regret this. In the story, when she had bullied him alongside Carson and friends, she was kicked out and died a sad, lonely death. She felt determined to stay alive in this life, no matter what. Seeing the empty look in Damien's big blue eyes, she remembered one of her adoptive parents calling her the dirty daughter of a thief, shouting at her to get out. While helping prep for dinner, her thoughts fixated on if she didn't interfere with the bullying, she might at least be able to avoid the bad ending. It was none of her business. He was the main character. Oh, surely he'd figure it out. But thinking about how disheveled and malnourished he was drove her to help him just this once. After this, she wouldn't get involved anymore. She entered the room where Carson was, teaching him a lesson, picking on Damien for looking like a girl since his face was so pretty. Ellie would clap back, saying, "Why does that matter? At least he's better looking than you." But when Carson would ask about what she said, she turned it around, claiming it was a joke and that the director was looking for him. So Carson shoved Damien off, and he and his crew took their leave. Damien began to wipe his scrapes, but Ellie told him to stop, since it'd lead to infection. She presented a bomb she'd stolen from the director's office, but he argued he wouldn't need it, since they'd just beat him up again. Ellie took this to heart. Resistance led to more violence. Surrender was the easiest way to quell it. Damien was so young, yet he already understood. She gave him the bomb anyways and took her leave, where outside the door, she thought of the two of them as similar. During the next supper, she noticed Damien was skipping, so she decided to take her bread and give it to him. Along the way, Carson spotted her, looking to show off his bullying of Damien again, especially since he'd heard from the director that Damien was a slave who hunted monsters in the dark all by himself. He teased there's no way that little brat was that tough. When he joked at the idea Ellie had a crush on Damien, she thought about how even though Carson bullied most of the children here, he was especially cruel to boys she took interest in. If he was less sadistic, she might have considered his behavior as a childish form of affection. She turned towards him brightly, saying she heard Damien was taken to the warehouse by the assistant teachers. And as they knew, there was a lot of delicious food there, and the adults always prized pretty children like Damien. All of this was to fuel Carson's insecurities. What he didn't know was that Damien didn't do work here because he was still a slave and had a master. Carson decided to head with his boys to the warehouse, but Ellie stopped to give him her bread, making him blush while his boys teased going, "Ooh, Carson." However, they'd be scolded by the caretakers for stealing, with the bread in Carson's hand. While outside though, Ellie would be searching for Damien in the dark. She remembered Earhart asking Damien if he'd ever received swordsmanship training since he was already good. But Damien replied, "In the dark, I had no choice but to learn how to use the sword. That's what it took to survive." When she read that sentence, she thought it was some hack-eyed platitude that implied that pain and darkness were parts of the hero's journey, not his cold reality. Finding him curled up, she warmly told him to come inside or he'd get sick. She explained Carson's crew was in trouble, but Damien knew it wouldn't be long until he was bullied again. He felt safer here. He chose to lock himself away in the darkness. That's how painful his life had been, and likely why he learned the sword. Ellie assured him they weren't going to bother him anymore, and promised she'd make sure no one hurts him. She told him to come with her again, and his eyes grew big, staring at her like she was a beacon of hope. He asked why. She answered because she wanted to. That was the truth. She wanted to because it would protect her from dying like in the original story. She offered her hand and led him back. He smiled all along the way. With them sneaking back in, she suddenly told him to get undressed. He was caught off guard, but of course, he couldn't wear clothes while taking a bath. She could see he needed a warm bath coming out of the cold. Otherwise, they'd have to cut off his hands or legs to deal with the frostbite. He tried to rub his hands to warm them, but she scolded that wouldn't work. He suddenly told her his body was repulsive and it hit her. He probably had lashes all over from his work as a slave. She grabbed his hands, telling him he had nothing to feel ashamed about, and finally convinced him to bathe, where he enjoyed the water's warmth. After his bath, Ellie presented some food she had snuck out of the warehouse. Damien stared at it quizzically, and Ellie was shocked to learn he had never eaten sandwiches before, and became infuriated thinking about what Damien was being fed all those years. She showed him how to eat one, and he enjoyed it with his blush-filled cheeks. Ellie now saw him as a cute, chubby-cheeked puppy, and drying his hair, it was like he was wagging his tail. She then asked about his scar. He supposedly had them when his master picked him up. So, they made him grow his hair long to cover them. She ruffled his hair to see his forehead, now thinking things would be more difficult from now on. More so because Damien's beauty wouldn't be good for her heart. Her heart beat. He was so much prettier than she expected. She brought Damien to their sleeping quarters, and was glad to see Carson and his friends weren't here. Her bed was near the window, and Damien's was closer to the door. Flopping onto her bed, she told him they could share her bed since it was Damien's first night here, making him a bit nervous. But she patted her pillow, telling him to come, and he stiffly flopped on as well. The two wished each other good night, and while Ellie slept, Damien stared at her. He thought she was unusual, questioning if she was just being nice because she felt guilty. However, her sweet words softened his reservations. Her glowing aura made his heart beat. Her eyes sparkled so prettily to him when she spoke his name. In contrast, his dream was a horror. His master laughed, telling him slaves were supposed to entertain their masters, and that he must fight the monsters off. In these moments, he knew no one would come to save him. If he didn't kill these monsters, he'd die. He had to pull it together, and suddenly awoke from his nightmares with Ellie calling his name. As she touched his head to check if he was sick, he saw his nightmarish vision turn to a worried Ellie. No one had ever worried about him before, himself included. She tried to get him a washcloth, but he grabbed her shirt, assuring her he didn't feel sick at all. She patted his head, and he thought about how when he was with her, he felt warm and tingly, as if he swallowed sunshine. And that's when Carson barged in to ruin the moment. He tried to put the blame on Damien for getting him in trouble, but Ellie would call him an idiot for falling for what she said. He grabbed Ellie, asking why she would do that to him, but a caretaker would enter to scold him for causing trouble again. She pulled him away, saying he was always the first to raise his fist, which was why none of the nobles ever showed interest in him. Carson tried to say it was Ellie's fault he ended up at the warehouse, but Ellie turned the tables on him, putting on the crocodile tears, as she said she'd never do that, and also hinted she had dirt on this particular caretaker getting frisky with the man in the warehouse. Ellie held all the cards to getting Carson punished right now, and after they were gone, Ellie proudly told Damien she'd protect him no matter what. His world began to gleam as she told him that one day he'd meet a grown-up who'd be there to help him, and after that, he'd live happily ever after. Meanwhile, Carson was slamming his fist on the table, stuck in this filthy room all by himself, blaming Damien. He was going to make Damien pay, determined to make Ellie's affections his alone. While Ellie and Damien prepared today's meal, she told him, regardless of what his life was like until now, that he couldn't let people take advantage of him anymore. He really took this to heart. No one had ever said something like that to him before. Until now, he only survived by obeying his master. He steeled his heart, vowing internally to not allow himself to be bested by anyone ever again, and to protect Ellie, just like she protected him. The director entered in on them, head throbbing from another night of drinking at the casino. She was surprised to see the slave boy working, thinking if only she hadn't lost that one game back then. His master promised to write off her debts, as long as she took care of him until she returned to pick him up. She needed to stop him from working, or she might get in trouble. But before she could, she'd get interrupted by Carson causing a commotion. He was being sent for punishment again, but tried to take Damien with him. However, Ellie would defend Damien again, her alibi being Damien was with her the whole time. The director did not like Ellie, especially the fact she'd get returned to the orphanage over and over because of her mother's horrible reputation. Ellie had never made a peep since her latest return, making the director suspicious, because why would she speak up about something now? Soon after, Damien would sit depressed by himself in the dining hall, because he was forbidden from working. But when Ellie would come by stretching out her hand to follow her, he'd cheer up instantly. Tommy was eager to sit on Ellie's right today, earning Damien's blazing jealousy. Ellie picked up on this, and made an excuse to have Tommy let it slide for the day. Suddenly, Betty started crying because she dropped her doll in her soup. Ellie immediately went to comfort her, and took Betty to get the doll cleaned up shortly. And with Damien by himself, Tommy tried to make friends. But when Tommy mentioned he and Ellie were best friends, Damien glared at him, making Tommy shake in fear. Then, when Ellie returned, Damien was bright and glowing like nothing had happened. Now Tommy could see Damien wasn't the mild-mannered boy he thought he was, but more akin to a cold-blooded beast. That night, Damien seemed a bit disappointed being sent to sleep in his own bed, flopping onto it like a depressed dog. When Ellie wished him a good night, she gasped, hearing him say, "Sweet dreams, Ellie." This was the first time he had ever said her name. She woke up later that night to find him missing, and Betty sat frightened as she uttered that Carson took him. Outside, Carson was roughing Damien up, telling Damien not to get full of himself, just because Ellie was nice to him. Damien glared back at the bully, remembering Ellie's words telling him he couldn't let people take advantage of him anymore. He was about to retaliate, but stopped, with Carson telling him Ellie was always soft on good-for-nothing weaklings like him, and that he was just one of many, not special at all. Damien had heard harsh and abusive words countless times as a slave, and was used to it as much as he was to physical violence. But in this moment when Carson said he meant nothing to Ellie, he felt his heart sink, like he was sinking deeper and deeper beneath the currents of a river, like ash in the wind. Carson attempted to toss Damien into the lake, but he'd be saved by Ellie, asking what Carson thought he was doing. Carson was stun-locked, wondering what made Damien so special to her. He came swinging at Damien, but she dodged, making him end up in the lake instead. The two ran off, and Damien fixated on this being the first time he had seen her get angry. He pondered on why she was so mad, because he was weak or pesky, and wondered if this was all a dream. He stopped to ask if she only took care of him because she pitied him, and she grabbed him to say of course not, and that she was sorry she made him feel that way, and that she thought he was stronger than anyone else. Tears dripped down his face. He was so sure she was going to say he was pathetic, and couldn't believe anyone would describe him as strong. She coddled him, telling him not to cry because his beautiful face was getting swollen. The two pinky promised on him trusting her words from now on, and that if someone tried to hurt him again, he would defend himself. Eventually, he found an excuse, saying he kept having nightmares so that he could sleep beside Ellie in her bed. She told him they were just like siblings, but he refused to get brother-zoned, telling her he wasn't her little brother. She would tease that he was so cute and pat him for a restful respite, where in his dreams, he saw the two of them alone in a field of flowers. He was so grateful for her. She made him so happy. However, in the morning, she'd find him coughing and feverish. Ellie unfortunately had to leave him to do her work for the day. She wanted to steal some medicine, but it didn't seem like the director was leaving anytime soon. The director sighed, thinking about how their finances were in shambles. She considered selling off a mana stone to pay off the debt. In this world, mana stones allowed anyone without mana to use magic, but these stones were very rare and could only be created with the help of a mage. They are often bought and sold at very high prices. She turned towards Ellie, irritated, wishing she wasn't the daughter of a thief, or else she'd be able to fetch a high price for her. She'd then get a report from one of the caretakers about Duke Schutz's actions, causing the number of nobles wanting to adopt orphans to plummet. When Erhardt paid visits to those that had adopted children, seeking Damien, less of them were adopting now because they didn't want to be confronted. The director had actually had this caretaker spread that the son of the late Duke Clyder was here, attempting to sell one of the blue-eyed boys off to him as a fake, since Erhardt had never seen Damien before. But what they didn't know, of course, was that Damien was Duke Clyder's child. Overhearing them, now Ellie knew Erhardt was coming to save Damien. Meanwhile, Erhardt called Damien's master pathetic for trying to poison him with herbs. She begged for forgiveness. She had no idea he was Duke Schutz. His assistant Auntie sighed, telling Erhardt to at least hear them out. However, Erhardt would remind them he was temperamental, and if they valued their lives, they would need to tell him where Damien was. The woman had no idea Damien was the actual son of Duke Clyder. Shaking, she explained he was at the orphanage her friend ran. Erhardt was pissed, raising his sword prepared to kill them, but Auntie stopped him, saying he didn't think they were lying, since he received a letter a few days ago that claimed the child they were searching for was at St. Orphanage, a place not too far from here. It was an orphanage in name only, where in reality, it was a place that took in orphans to use them for profit. Erhardt was not pleased to only hear about this now, considering he already ransacked every orphanage in the Empire. He pointed his blade at Auntie, expressing how he wanted to kill him right now. But he couldn't kill his own aide, so he decided to kill the two nobles in front of him first. Back in the orphanage sleeping quarters, Ellie was doing her best to keep Damien warm with the heat mana stone she stole earlier. As she rubbed his head, he murmured it felt nice, making her heart beat because he was just too adorable. She went to get more water for him, but was promptly caught by the director, who picked out the stone right from her pocket. The director then began to berate Ellie for taking after her mother, and as she was about to give Ellie a smack for punishment, Damien came to defend Ellie, and he shouted that if she hit her, he'd make her pay. The director remembered her friend telling her that Damien tended to hold grudges, and that if he was upset about something, he'd attack indiscriminately. She was suddenly notified Erhardt would be visiting the orphanage shortly. She commanded the caretakers to start cleaning at once, and to make sure the children wore nicer clothes. Erhardt stormed in, seeking Damien himself. He couldn't believe how cold it was here, definitely not good for young children, and ordered Auntie to dispose of the director promptly if she was lying about having Damien here. That was when Ellie accidentally bumped into him. He apologized, and as she thanked him for helping her up, he took notice of her bright green eyes. She explained to him that the boy he was looking to adopt was in the director's office, and with her walking away, Auntie thought of her as odd. She was the first person to face the Duke without crying, but continued to ponder, remembering there was one more person who didn't so much as blink when they looked at him. But that was a long time ago. The two men met with the director, who presented all the boys she had with black hair and blue eyes, save for Damien, since he was still resting in his room. As the boys cried, Erhardt checked the mana stone infused with Damien's mana. However, since it didn't react, he knew none of these boys were Damien. Believing the director had lied, he ordered Auntie to kill her, but then remembered Ellie mentioning there were 5 boys with black hair and blue eyes, so one was missing. He pulled out his sword beside the director, telling her to reveal where the 5th child was, and that if she dared to lie, he would kill her where she stood. Back at the sleeping quarters, Ellie squeezed Damien's hand. She was a little sad knowing Damien and her would be separated, but thought it was for the best. And then Duke Erhardt entered. Auntie couldn't believe the Duke was getting so emotional. He hadn't seen the Duke like this since his wife passed. Erhardt was surprised to see Damien was quite scrawny. Damien suddenly stood up to protect Ellie, telling Erhardt not to look at her so threateningly. He didn't care who Erhardt was. If someone hurt Ellie, he'd make them pay. Erhardt smirked, seeing Damien was so fierce for being such a pipsqueak. He asked Damien who he thought he could protect when he couldn't even stand straight. Then, he was suddenly alerted by the overflowing mana from the stone that flew into Damien. Now he knew this was indeed his best friend's son. Damien then collapsed into Ellie's arms, and Erhardt assured her there was no reason to fret. Damien just reabsorbed the mana that was taken from him, and it would help him build up strength. His fever went away, but Erhardt wasn't done. He wanted to hear from the caretakers why Damien looked so unwell, and if he found their explanation unsatisfactory, he would cut off their tongues and kill them this instant. As they scurried to gather the adoption papers, Ellie thought about how Duke Erhardt was exactly as the book described. A man domineering beyond compare, and able to intimidate those around him with ease. Auntie tried telling Erhardt he could try saying things nicer, comparing Erhardt to resembling a demon king. There's no way Damien would be pumped to get adopted by him. After Damien was put back on the bed, Erhardt commented on how Ellie acted as though she knew he was searching for the boy, even though this was the first time he'd ever been to this region. He wanted to know how she knew. She could tell he was testing her. She needed to answer carefully, otherwise she could end up on the streets, just like the original Ellie. She nervously answered that she had heard from the director, but he didn't buy it, since she went out of her way to mention there were 5 children. So, she tried a different approach, adding that she hoped he'd take a closer look at the rest of the orphanage too, and that she wanted him to see what things were like here. She wanted him to notice the teachers didn't take care of them. They did all the work, while the caretakers left them at night to go out to the casino so they could gamble and have fun. Taking a second look, he could see Ellie resembled his late wife. With the director brought in, Erhardt immediately told her he would be adopting both Damien and taking Ellie as his daughter-in-law. Ellie couldn't believe this. Damien was supposed to end up with the female lead, Ashabel, but also felt relief. It hadn't been long, but she was already attached to Damien. It made her happy to think they wouldn't have to part ways. The director objected, bringing up the fact Ellie was a lowly brat, whose mother was a thief that had stolen from Count Lachenel. She was the daughter of a criminal. There was once a thief whose daring endeavors shook the Empire. When the Empire was going through the turbulence of war, one thief managed to get past the Imperial Palace's security and quietly made off with the Emperor's most precious treasure. The Emperor conducted a large-scale manhunt to track down the thief, but he was never able to find her. She was eventually captured at Count Lachenel's residence and hung on sight. The Duke and Auntie knew all about that woman, but never knew she had a daughter. Erhardt told the director that was enough. He was done listening to her nonsense. He bent down on one knee before Ellie, leaving it her choice if she wanted to come with him. She would only accept on one condition though. She wanted him to dismiss all the caretakers that worked here. The director began to freak out, and Auntie was impressed by how bold Ellie was. Ellie continued on about how the other children here would continue to suffer and wanted this place to become an upstanding orphanage. That way, the other children wouldn't be treated like products to be bought and sold. Erhardt accepted, commanding Auntie to strip all the caretakers of their credentials. Ellie had no idea he'd act so quickly, and now he was holding out his hand, asking her once more if she'd join him. She wondered what his aim was, but was glad everything worked out. She aimed to stay by Damien's side until he would meet the female lead and fall in love with her, accepting the Duke's offer. On the ride back, Erhardt ordered all the caretakers to be banished to a certain location, and that the people from his domain would run the orphanage until the newly appointed director arrived. Ellie felt so relieved. Erhardt thought this was odd. Everything went far too smoothly for this to be mere coincidence. At first, he thought Ellie was one of the Emperor's spies, but questioned why she offered her own conditions instead of immediately agreeing to come with him. He also noticed how she seemed genuinely happy that the orphanage would change. He thought about how his late wife had done something similar, how she had told him she could solve the problem troubling him as long as he fulfilled one condition, marrying her. He could see Ellie shined as the other orphans ran to her, saying their goodbyes. As he lit a cigar, he told Damien his glares were pointless, since you couldn't kill just by looking at someone. Damien, however, wanted to know why Erhardt was adopting him and taking Ellie. The Duke explained he wasn't taking Damien. but merely returning him to his rightful place, and that he would understand soon enough what was meant to belong to him. And at the very least, he'd be able to protect those he sought to protect. Damien was shaking. Grown-ups were even scarier and harder to trust than children. He didn't want to go with Erhardt, but could tell something was different. Since he didn't harm Ellie, he shouted at Erhardt, telling him not to force Ellie to work, and that if he mistreated her, he'd make him pay. Erhardt clicked his tongue, thinking Damien was just like his father, and that he didn't even need a monostone to prove his identity. Duke Kleider was soft and affectionate with his wife, but his disposition would change the moment he was in the presence of others. On the carriage ride, Ellie woke up to a crow monster pecking at the window. The territory was so spooky, and even worse than she imagined. Arriving at the estate, though, it was quite the contrast, being both huge and magnificent. They were greeted by the head butler, Franz, and the maids, where Franz had only just learned Erhardt took in a future daughter-in-law on top of Damien. Franz sighed, telling Auntie he should have stopped Erhardt, and Ellie's heart sank, even though it's not like she expected to be welcomed with open arms. When she was younger, she got smacked by one of her adopting mothers when she learned Ellie was the daughter of the infamous thief. Franz explained they didn't have a suitable maid to serve her as of yet, but Ellie would tell them she would be fine on her own. She didn't want them to think she was some annoying needy kid. Erhardt would then get notice that the House Kleider vassals and distant relatives were waiting for him, since rumors of him finding Duke Kleider's son had spread far and wide. His head began to throb, knowing he'd have to deal with them. Ellie knew these people could all pose a threat to Damien. Erhardt may have just adopted him, but it wouldn't be long before they fully realized the strength of their bond. House Kleider's vassals and relatives were angry, thinking there was no way the late Duke Kleider's son could still be alive, and this had to be some kind of trick. They were all eyeing to get their hands on the Merchant Guild again. They'd been running it for the last 11 years. Erhardt reluctantly entered, telling him his ears hurt from their blather all the way from down the hall. He suspected they'd be running their mouths, so he thought it was best he paid them a visit in person. He spoke plainly, telling them he indeed found the child, and they were already trying to pit him against Damien, saying that Damien was the rightful head of House Kleider. He turned the tables on them, saying he'd spare nothing to ensure that both Damien and Ellie would be able to carry on the Kleider name in all its glory. The other men stood up in anger, but he wouldn't have it. He would see to it that when the time came, Damien and Ellie would wed. No matter how young someone might be, they were recognized as an official member of the family when they completed their betrothal rites. And once wed, Damien would rightfully inherit the Merchant Guild. Erhardt knew they would have found a way to cast off Damien or have him marry one of their daughters, but he wouldn't let that happen. He smugly asked for their blessings and loyalty, certain he could count on them to accept his decision. One of the Viscounts began shaking. He never expected Erhardt to come ready with a wife for Damien. He needed a new plan. Ellie was in awe seeing her sparkling new room. She turned to Damien, but instead only saw the maids, since he was being taken to his bath by Franz. Roina and the maids would be serving her from now on, explaining they'd be doing everything in their power to ensure Ellie's comfort. Ellie was somewhat nervous, never having ordered adults around before. The lower maids then introduced themselves in order as Ivana, May, and Ashel. Ellie thanked them, and the three maids glimmered, thinking Ellie was so kind. Ellie was pampered by them. They thought she was so cute and pretty. At night, she rolled over on her bed, bumping into Damien, wondering if something was wrong. There was nothing wrong, actually. He was just taken aback, and Ellie could see he got a haircut. She assumed he was feeling self-conscious because of it, when in reality, he was thinking she seemed even prettier than when he last saw her. His heart wouldn't stop beating so rapidly. Ellie told Damien that she learned from Roina that the two of them would be getting married. Damien had no idea what that meant, or even what love was. So she tried explaining love was like when your insides tingle, and you feel like you had a fever all over, and your heart pounded fast. He began to panic, wondering if that meant he loved Ellie. She began to poke his cheeks, bringing up that his face was so red, and he looked like he was about to explode. She thought about how everyone had to know their place. She was certain the day would come when everyone here would realize she was the daughter of a thief. That's why she needed to sit tight and play it safe. Going to bed, the two cuddled, since Damien didn't like the idea of sleeping apart from her, and the two slept peacefully. Meanwhile, the Kleider house relative from earlier, Viscount Corbinu, had received intel on Ellie's origins being the daughter of the infamous thief. He assumed if the Emperor learned the truth, the wealth of both House Schutz and Kleider could be confiscated by the imperial family. He now knew how he could serve his interests and take Ellie out of the picture in one fell swoop. The next morning, the maids dressed her prettily, since she'd be introduced to the elders and vassals of House Schutz. The servants squealed over how cute she was. They'd soon be notified Corbinu wanted to meet with Ellie, and upon his greeting, she could tell he wasn't just here to see her. He clearly wanted something. He had a servant bring in a blue hope crystal, a mana stone that could only be found in their territory, with the goal of having Ellie try to steal it, so he could catch her in the act. After Corbinu kicked Roina out, he glared at Ellie, telling her to stop looking at the crystal and that it wasn't something she deserved to see, much less covet. Bewildered, she hit him back with an "excuse me?" But Corbinu ignored, referring to himself as a generous man. He would allow her to fawn over it, telling her to return it to his maid once she was done, then slammed the door on his leaving her baffled. Ellie hurried off, getting called to meet with Damien, and the Viscount's maid became frantic. She had orders from her master to slip the mana stone into Ellie's pocket to frame her. The maid ran over to her, staggering over to slip it in, and Ellie would check back on her to make sure she was okay. She would then grace herself before Erhardt's family, and they spoke in hushed whispers amongst each other negatively over the fact she didn't even have a last name, and that she was a commoner. Damien clenched his teeth over their bad-mouthing, but Erhardt kept him in line. That's when Corbinu began enacting his plan, beginning with his maid whispering in his ear that the stone he wanted to show Erhardt was missing, so he could frame Ellie as the child of that ignoble thief. Now everyone was causing a ruckus over this. Ellie began to shake and tremble, swearing she didn't take anything, and declaring if they didn't find it on her, she wanted an apology. Corbinu begrudgingly accepted. Then, when the maid went to check the pocket she slipped the stone in, she was stunned, announcing it wasn't there. So then, Corbinu got in on the action, and now that the rest of their relatives were chattering in confusion, he started to shake her, demanding she tell the truth. Erhardt wouldn't take this ridiculous scene any longer. Grabbing the Viscount's arm, Erhardt smirked, having already caught on to Corbinu's ploy. He commanded Auntie to search the Viscount, and lo and behold, the crystal was in the Viscount's pocket. Corbinu couldn't believe it. Rewinding back to earlier, since Ellie was the daughter of a thief, she was able to catch on to the maid's trick easily. She then stealthily removed the blue hope crystal from her pocket and returned it to the Viscount's when he went to search her. Bro inherited thief class stats from her mom. Uh-oh. Now Erhardt is telling Corbinu he needs to pay the price for deception. And so, Auntie dragged him out for his punishment. Then, Erhardt reminded the family they owed Ellie an apology. They then got on their knees, begging for mercy and forgiveness. Erhardt mentioned he wanted the two children to marry. One of the family members reminded them it was forbidden for a noble to marry a commoner, and Erhardt was quite aware, which is why he wanted one of them to adopt her as their daughter. Everyone here was stunned, Ellie included. Who would want the daughter of a thief? Since no one was coming forward, he told Ellie to choose. This made her think back to all the families that tossed her aside after learning who her real mother was. Her mother had told her she knew her life was going to be hard with them separated, but she would be loved wherever she went, and that from the moment she was born, she was loved more than anything in this world. At first, Ellie resented her mother for condemning her to such a dishonorable life, but ultimately, she was the only person who loved her unwaveringly. Suddenly, they'd be interrupted by a message to Baron Marvin Amanta. His wife's condition had taken a turn for the worst, so he had to leave. Ellie thought back to the novel and remembered who he was, a nobleman who owned a small mine. But later on, Damien would use a sword forged from a mineral discovered from the mine to emerge victorious in battle. She got excited, thinking about how loaded he was with money. She asked to be adopted by Baron Amanta, and Erhardt didn't object, but knew the Baron would need some persuasion. He whispered that her ruses might have worked on someone as dense as Corbinu, but they wouldn't work on Marvin. And Ellie was shocked that Erhardt picked up on what she did. She wondered why he let her get away with it, but could now see he could see her worth, and vowed to show him she could do it. Soon after, she and Damien would go and play outside in the castle gardens. Damien would flag her down to show the pretty flowers that had the same color as her hair, and she would point out the flowers were the same color as his eyes. She was so glad to see him smiling now. She would tell him she was going to be adopted by the Baron soon, and he was concerned she'd be leaving him. However, she explained she'd only be taking his surname and staying here with him, just like she promised. This made Damien smile so brightly, he was smiling with his eyes. The two would play hide and seek all the way to the evening, since it was the last day of leisure, as Damien would begin his sword training starting the next day. Then, they'd suddenly be approached by a strange, ominous being and clutch each other close out of fear. Opening their eyes, they suddenly found a trembling woman before them. Ellie touched her, feeling the woman's body was as cold as ice. She tried to calm the woman down, introducing herself to her sweetly. However, the woman couldn't seem to remember who she was. Ellie thus assumed she suffered from oclemency, a disease similar to dementia, causing one to lose their memories, but also worsened the afflicted's condition when they were anxious or upset. It also had no cure. Ellie eventually convinced the woman to come to the garden with the prospect of seeing pretty flowers, and it was also warm there. Then, Marvin would call out to his wife, Vieira. This woman was in fact Baroness Amanta. With Marvin taking her back, he glared at Ellie, telling her she better make sure she wasn't using his wife's suffering for her own gain. Ellie panicked over this, but Damien would coldly tell the Baron not to speak poorly of her, and defend her, saying she was kinder than anyone. Ellie didn't want the two beefing, since Marvin was once a great knight who would eventually teach Damien the sword someday. Seeing her calm Damien down, Marvin scoffed at her, claiming she had a knack for tricks, but he wouldn't fall for them, and had no intention of taking her as his daughter. Oh man, looks like she's gonna have a hard time winning him over. Damien admitted he got mad at Marvin for insulting her, and asked if defending her was wrong. She grabbed his shoulders, telling him no, and that she was proud of him, and proceeded to give him tons of head pats. Ivana then came running to them, asking if they had seen the Baroness. Ellie asked to learn more about Vieira, and turns out she got sick after the couple had their son Garrett. Ellie became perplexed, thinking that for someone who suffered from an incurable illness, her condition didn't seem that bad. She even said her husband's name as soon as she saw him. That evening, Marvin was at a loss. He was so happy when he found out he and his wife were going to have a baby, but after she came down with illness after Garrett's birth, the sickness causing her memory lapses happened more frequently. He lashed out at her one night and found her asleep on a cliff nearby the castle. He pondered the reason for her losing her memories. Was it because she wanted to forget? He was the one that wanted a child in the first place. His wife loved her freedom more than anyone. He wondered if he burdened her with his selfish desires. Suddenly, she would tell him that Ellie saved her by warming her hands and giving her a scarf. She called Ellie a little angel. Seeing his wife smile so brightly, he couldn't believe this. It had been so long since he'd seen it. She told him to come with her to visit Ellie tomorrow. That way, they could apologize together, because Ellie was her savior. His heart felt heavy from her words, so he nodded and accepted. They would later go and visit the kids, offering their apology. Marvin admitted he misunderstood what had transpired. At this moment, it hit Ellie. Marvin didn't realize the full potential of his mind or until much later, likely because he was so worried about his wife that he couldn't focus on anything. All she had to do was create an environment that allowed him to concentrate on his work. Then, he'd be able to forge Damien's sword faster. She asked the Baron for a small favor in the spirit of accepting his apology. Bringing up she heard people who suffered from oclemency became easily confused. She asked him to not lash out at his wife from here on out. He agreed, surprised that was all she wanted. And then she convinced the Baroness to visit her 3 days a week at the garden. Vieira was honored. The two women would chat over sweets. The Baroness laughed over the peculiarity of Erhardt intervening in Ellie's life by taking her, and decided to tell Ellie on the speculative reason that he might have done it. About 15 years ago, the Empire waged a major war due to a prophecy the great Temple Graphs received. A mystical power will bring glory to the Empire once more. The mystical power referred to the mysterious life force flowing from the World Tree. Through this power, people realized that nature was a source of magic. Beings that lived close to the tree were born with mana more powerful as well. Tribes that lived close to the World Tree were able to use unique kinds of magic also. Then suddenly, the World Tree withered. Despite the best efforts of the tribes, the World Tree no longer blossomed, which led to a number of rumors, one being that the tribes were hiding the full truth in order to hoard the World Tree's powers, even though they were the ones who had saved it. And so, the Emperor declared war against the tribes. The late Duke Kleider and Erhardt both fought in the war together, where the two became the best of friends. Soon after, the Empire emerged victorious, successfully repressing the tribes. The people were delighted to welcome Erhardt back, but also surprised to see him return with the late Lady Yuria, who was from one of the tribes. This perplexed Ellie a bit, since there was nothing that mentioned Duchess Schutz in the books, much less someone from the tribes. People called the Schutz family the Devil's Progeny. For generations, members of the Schutz family have suffered from madness. Vieira heard their family suffered from an ancient curse. That's why they say that his lands were cursed too. But after Lady Yuria arrived, it was like Erhardt's madness disappeared overnight. The couple fought quite often, but still deeply loved one another. Unfortunately, there was a price to pay for wielding the magic of the tribes. When Erhardt went to quell the uprising of the Rebel Alliance 3 years later, Yuria used her magic to break Erhardt's curse on her own. But after the incident, he severed relations with everyone, though he maintained correspondence with Duke Kleider. 2 years later, he received word that Duke Clyder's wife gave birth to a baby boy. That was when His Grace opened the gates of his castles for the first time. Then, Duke Clyder and his wife fell from a cliff that same night. Vieira believed Erhardt felt guilty about what happened to Damien, and that the death of the Clyders was his fault. Ellie could relate, having lost her mother as well. Ellie reminded Vieira of her son, and then mentioning he was busy working at the mines, Ellie's eyes lit up over the prospect of money. She asked Vieira if she could visit the mines. Meanwhile, Garrett struggled while refining a blade, feeling concerned that he wouldn't be able to make his ailing mother happy at this rate, nor receive recognition from his father. When his father came to greet him, he promised to do his best to make him proud. Ellie hurt her head, bumping into the Baron. He sighed, knowing his wife and Ellie had come here when there were tons of dangerous tools. Garrett would then show her a monocle that used the power of the Monostone. It made her a bit dizzy, until he showed her she had used it with the other eye closed. She eventually discovered a chest of unique ores Garrett warned her not to touch, since they'd only been recently discovered, and body heat made them hard immediately. Once stuck, they were impossible to get off, and they emitted a strange substance as well. Ellie squealed these jewels were a lot like a monster, giving Garrett a memory of when he saw similar crystals when he was younger, and was warned not to touch them because they were in fact monsters posing as crystals. This was all a part of her plan to make them start using these crystal monsters to make them into the most deadly, poisonous weapons. Vieira then praised her for all the help she provided her and her family. Franz would later present Erhardt with an arrow laced for the monster crystal, and he was quite impressed, although wishing it were a sword. He was then more surprised to learn all the discoveries about this crystal were all made by Ellie. He originally took her in because he suspected some connection between her and the Emperor. He could tell she was both bold and clever, and that they might be using her to train Damien to submit to them. Moreover, he knew the death of Duke Clyder and his wife was no accident. He thought he would be at an advantage by keeping Ellie close, in case she slipped up and accidentally revealed something about the Emperor. Hearing a creak at the door, Franz readied his blade. But it was just Ellie. She made the excuse she was here to visit Erhardt, when in reality, she was overhearing their conversation and trying to learn more about the ore development. She knew with one wrong move, she could have died here. Franz quickly tossed his blade away, trying to make it look like he wasn't going to kill an intruder at all. Ellie then presented some medicine, having heard Erhardt often suffered from headaches, and the Duke took it immediately, not allowing Franz to check it first. Erhardt asked what it was for. He was never sick, and she started to sweat over how fast he caught on. She was trying to schmooze him up, because she was also here to choose a new family to adopt her. She told him she wanted to be adopted by House Schutz, so Erhardt. But he would tell her to stop being ridiculous. He hated inconvenient fuss, and disliked children even more. Accepting her defeat, she left for the day. But somewhere in Erhardt's heart, there was a part of him wishing she had nothing to do with the Emperor. Ellie guessed Erhardt wouldn't accept her, but he was a lot sterner than she expected. Her idea was to be his daughter instead of daughter-in-law, and then be out of his hair once she came of age. She knew there were 4 years left until Damien goes to war. The female lead would be introduced another 5 years after that, which meant she had 9 years left. Ellie was filled with determination to find a way to survive by the time the female lead appears. She and Vieira walked in on Damien's training, and Ellie was astonished seeing him on the ground. She was worried he was hurt or sick, since his cheeks were bright red and he was sweating. However, he'd assure her he was fine. He just sat down, being a bit tired from the intense training. And goodness, even all the adults were huffing and heaving as well. Despite knowing Damien was destined to become a swordmaster, she was worried the adults were training him too hard. She offered to watch Damien's training more often to make sure no one was bullying him. He tried to say he really was fine, but with her responding that he might be suggesting he didn't want her to watch, he put on his puppy dog whimpers to beg her to come, even though his trainers were the ones having a hard time. She recognized this expression as a similar one that Tommy made that one time he ate all of Betty's cookies, but trusted that Damien would never lie to her. Meanwhile, all the big men were silently begging for help. Marvin then arrived, since he promised to help with Damien's training today. He also brought a bow as a gift for Ellie. It was infused with mana. Right now, he didn't have the skill to produce swords made from the monster crystal, but brought up that Waybrock, the Schutz Castle smithy, might have the ability to. The only problem being, he's currently blind in one eye. Ellie decided she'd go around the castle to gather more intel on Waybrock, but Damien would stop her to admit he didn't like Marvin because he was rude to her. Ellie would persuade Damien to trust the Baron more, and she really appreciated him listening. Internally, she felt bad because in the original story, Damien wasn't disliked by the other people here. She thought it was her fault for coming with him. She felt she should be the one cast aside. Not him. She knew he needed to get stronger. If the important vassals of House Schutz recognized his strength, then other people wouldn't be able to treat him with disrespect or hostility. Franz entered, taking note of how well Damien was holding his own against Marvin. Marvin wasn't planning on sparring so seriously, but against Damien's abilities, he got carried away. He was impressed by Damien's ability to predict his moves and counter so ruthlessly. Even knights that live and die on the battlefield didn't have battle instincts like this. After knocking Damien back, he told the boy to get up, because the training wasn't over. He then quickly knocked the wooden sword out of Damien's hand, and told him to get rest. But then, with Ellie approaching Damien, Marvin smirked, thinking he understood why Erhardt brought her now. She's never seen Damien look so disappointed before. She hoped he wasn't harboring any hatred towards the Baron, but when he turned towards her, she'd be surprised to hear him say he wanted to get stronger. She smiled, thinking she had nothing to worry about. Patting him, she said he was already strong enough, but he replied no, and that he needed to get stronger so he could protect those he cared about. He felt he couldn't do anything yet. She found this strange, since in the original story, he says this when the female lead makes an appearance. Later, Ashel would take the two to the Red Lake. Many people have drowned in it because they were entranced by its color and fell in. She showed them it to warn them. Then suddenly, a scruffy man with an eye patch came out of a cabin chugging booze. Ashel didn't like the alcohol smell oozing off of Waybrock, and Ellie took notice of who this man was. Returning to the estate, she was shocked to learn he stopped making weapons because his daughter died in the lake. Then, he went blind in one eye. Things improved when Lady Yuria arrived, but after she died, he just started drinking all day, and also refused treatment from the castle physician. On another day, Ellie went to go see the castle physician so she could get him to help Waybrock. However, she'd end up overhearing his call with the Lord from House Quintar. They were purposely keeping Waybrock sick as a plot to make sure there wouldn't be anyone who could make a sword that could contain Erhardt's aura. That way, House Quintar could take over the weapons trade. Later, Waybrock woke up to the crows being louder than usual, and spotting Ellie by the Red Lake where his daughter had drowned, he pulled her away, and with her coming up from the snow, she gave him a "Good day, sir," and thanked him for saving her. She wanted to show him the mana arrow she got, and immediately, the castle smithy couldn't take his eyes off of it. He grabbed it to take a closer look, and she was smug, knowing he'd fallen for her trap. Inside his place, she thought about what she could do about the people trying to keep him sick. She spotted the medicine he'd been taking, and decided to take it with her. She decided to bait him so she could find out if he was eating enough. She brought up that she was hungry, and learned he didn't have anything to eat. She then scolded him, saying if he ate well today, then he'd live well tomorrow. He reminisced on it being a long time since he'd heard something like that from his daughter. He said she was smart and pretty, but no longer around having drowned in that lake. He blamed himself, saying he should have told her to stay away from it. Ellie responded that it wasn't his fault, and that her mother passed away because of her, and that if it weren't for her, her mother wouldn't have done something so extreme, and that if his daughter could see him now, she would probably say, "It's not your fault, Dad." Ellie began taking her leave, letting her borrow the arrow for the day, and that he could repay her by playing with her and her friends tomorrow at the castle. He was shocked hearing he might have to go, while she beamed at him brightly, secretly knowing she got him. He stayed up all night studying that arrow, now wanting to see the aura that the arrowhead was made from, but then questioned who would want him working on anything. He hadn't picked up his smithy hammer for the last 10 years. He was also hoping he didn't smell like booze. Can't reek of alcohol in front of the kids. He was stopped by the guards at the gate. He figured as much, since there were only a handful of people who recognized him since he'd been away so long. And that's when Lady Amantha arrived to let him in. He was quite surprised to find out Ellie wasn't just some maid, but instead, Lord Damien's betrothed, and she got him into a room with Marvin so they could start working together. She smirked, thinking it was all going according to plan, while Damien thought she must really like hot cocoa. Marvin got excited, because if he and Waybrock worked together, they could make a sword from the monster crystal. Marvin felt a little bad though, seeing his eye hadn't healed yet, and asked if Waybrock was still refusing treatment. But Waybrock had no idea what he was talking about. He'd been taking medicine from Dr. Duran for quite some time. He realized he forgot to take his medicine while he was looking at the arrow last night, but noticed his vision seemed clearer than usual, and now pondered if that medicine was making him sick. Now, he wanted a favor. During a Schutz family meeting, Erhardt fiddled with the bottle Ellie had given him, filled with pills to make him feel better. Auntie was surprised to see Erhardt in such a good mood. Today, Viscount Quintar presented a newly produced weapon, a sword lighter and easier to wield. This was the house plotting to get rid of Waybrock. That way, Erhardt would have to take weapons from them moving forward. The meeting would be interrupted by Royna seeking Dr. Diren. Supposedly, Ellie was in pain because of the eye drops he gave her. He objected, saying he's never given her medicine before, and that's when Royna would present the medicine bottle Ellie stole from Waybrock. It was actually a liquid made from the cursed water of the Red Lake, and now the doctor was nervous. If Ellie ended up blind, it'd certainly be off with his head. He got up to examine her condition at once, admitting the vial contained a dangerous poison, not expecting Waybrock to be standing before him, now confirming the medicine was fake. The doctor immediately ratted out Viscount Quintar for making him do it, and pulled out receipts. A recording orb where the Viscount explained with Waybrock out of the picture, and then Erhardt. House Quintar would rule over the weapons trade. Erhardt got up, explaining he thought someone might have been a conniving rat plotting against him while he was looking for Damien. He just didn't expect it to be someone in his own castle. The Viscount trembled in fear. He could see Erhardt had the eyes of a murderer, whose madness could only be quelled by bloodshed. With the blade pointed at the Viscount's neck, Waybrock would intervene, presenting a brand new sword for the first time in 10 years. After Erhardt slayed the Viscount, he asked for more swords from Waybrock. That way, his soldiers could get used to them. Everything seemed to work out, except Erhardt's menacing aura was still emanating. He burst into Ellie's room, watching her reading happily, and began to shake her, asking about her eye. Auntie would walk in on this chaotic scene and try to drag his lord out, but Erhardt wouldn't budge. After they exited, Auntie gave him a handkerchief to wipe the blood off of himself. Thinking the sight of it might have frightened Ellie, Erhardt thought back to Ellie's somewhat nervous-looking expression and commanded Auntie to give all of their troops handkerchiefs to carry on them as well. He wanted them to be made from the softest fabric possible. That way, if a knight ever had to lend one to her, she'd like it. It was quite strange to see Erhardt had a soft spot for someone. Ellie and Damien would stare in awe as their carriage arrived at the Pelin district within Duchy of Schutz. Ellie's plan was to build rapport with other merchants. That way, she could do business with them once she wasn't living with the Duke anymore. The two would peruse around until they got to eating, where Damien got food on his face. Seeing Ellie didn't have anything to wipe it off, Sir Raynor handed her a handkerchief, the same as Erhardt had commanded all his knights to carry on them. In a shop, she noticed a girl steal some jewelry from a merchant. After exposing her, her father would give her a serious scolding, but the girl would expose the fact that the man promised her he would return what he took and give her bread if she stole. The man then knocked the girl down, and that's when Ellie realized he wasn't the girl's real father. The man then shoved Ellie for trying to scold him, and now realizing he was cooked, he and his fake wife ran off, with Raynor chasing after. Ellie then handed the girl back her bracelet she pickpocketed off the man. We find out the girl lived at Marite Orphanage, not too far from here, and Ellie's jaw dropped, learning her name was Grace. In the book, Grace was an important holy knight who risked her life to protect the female lead, Ashabel. Ellie thought it was weird to say, but Grace was very handsome. And when Grace returned the compliment, Damien would not take it well. With Ellie and Damien being taken away by Raynor, Ellie gave Grace the medicine she received from the maids. Ellie knew she might leave in the future, but hoped Grace would take good care of Damien for her. At night, Damien was down because Ellie called him pretty. He didn't want to be pretty, he wanted to be handsome, just like Grace. Ellie would try to quell his insecurities about Grace by saying being handsome was good, but by her standards, the most handsome man was Erhardt. He's a 10. Oh no, this only made Damien sadder. She tried to cheer him up by saying she liked him the most because he was both pretty and handsome. She felt exhausted. Raising a child wasn't easy. As the two snuggled up together, Damien uttered he wanted to stay by her side forever. By liking this video and subscribing to my channel, because here at My Shoujo Weekly, I've got tons of fantasy manhwa for you to enjoy. I even have a whole playlist you can watch. Finish the entire thing? Well, did you know I have the completed series playlist? It has not just manhwa, but every anime I've completed on the channel to a finished season. So come on, hit that subscribe, and I'll be your guy. Nearly landing a bullseye, Viera applauded Ellie's improvement in her bow skills. Hearing from Viera that they'd be a family soon, Ellie's heart beat. She was so used to being cast aside by her previous families. She knew she'd just wind up disappointed if she expected too much. It's not like they were becoming a real family. Everyone was just following the Duke's orders. Viera would then tell her being family wasn't a relationship born of necessity. Loving and taking care of each other is what was important. Viera remembered being told once that being born into this world is more than enough for those around you. No one had ever told this to Ellie before. Shooting another arrow, Ellie went to go retrieve it. She was suddenly approached by a crow who took the form of a man. The man asked her if she was close to the hammer, and hearing him say she cured the hammer of blindness, she could tell he was referring to Waybrock. He was thankful she saved their master. Seeing him touch the arrowhead with his bare hands, but not getting hurt, she now realized exactly what he was. Garrett would rush to Ellie's side, but the men would apologize for the misunderstanding. They were merely here to repay Ellie for her help. All they wanted was the raw talent to craft powerful swords. It was their clan's mission to make the strongest weapons in the world. Ellie had once read about a clan like this in the history books. According to the legends, their clan once forged the holy sword used by the imperial family. The sword was born of strong divine power and their clan's mana, and it was said the sword was powerful enough to destroy evil beings. The Crowmen would explain that after the chief of their clan died, they lost their guiding light, and their ability to produce impressive craftsmanship decayed. That's when they saw the Hammer's sword, referring to Waybrock. They fell in love with his raw talent, and have considered him their master ever since. But then, he locked himself in his house, and stopped making weapons. That really upset them. But with Ellie saving his eyesight, he could continue forging swords. In their eyes, she was their savior. Through all the talking, Garrett would ask Ellie if she understood what they were saying. She only just now realized that she was the only one who could converse with them. According to one of the men, named Talon, if a person had even one parent who hailed from the mystical tribes that lived near the World Tree, they could understand the language of non-human races. Occasionally, the blood of a distant ancestor made its way down the family tree too. Ellie had read something like that in the original story. It was said that only members of the imperial family could speak to animals. She herself was just a minor character, so she doubted that she was actually part of the imperial family or mysterious tribes. She couldn't understand what was going on. She would later bring the men to Waybrock and tell him Talum and the rest wanted to be his apprentices. The birdmen swarmed him with joy, and wanting to prove their abilities, they decided to take the crystal monsters and make even a better arrow than the one Ellie was holding. The trio got to work and very quickly produced a sparkling new arrow. Seeing the quickness of production and their ability to touch the monster crystals by hand, Waybrock and Garrett concluded they must be from the clan that produced holy swords for the Empire. Waybrock asked Ellie if the men would be willing to work with him, and she feigned ignorance, while thinking this was all going according to plan. While the birdmen were eager to become apprentices, Ellie would bait them into saying, "No way, never," in the human language to make it look like they were having serious negotiations. That way, she could stake a claim in all of this too. Negotiation and interpretation services didn't come for free after all. Later that evening, while Garrett and his mother were returning home, he would think about the pain Ellie suffered when people called her the daughter of a thief. He never wanted her to feel that way again. He suggested they tell his father about what happened today, including Ellie's ability to speak to shapeshifters. But his mother told him they must not. She believed Ellie must be of imperial blood. And thinking back, it was never revealed what exactly Ellie's mother stole from the imperial family. Perhaps it wasn't a jewel or some rare treasure, but maybe his majesty's child. She told Garrett to keep it a secret because Empress Carthea would do anything to make her son the second prince into the crown prince. And so he accepted. Ellie couldn't sleep that night, likely because of everything that happened during the day. She began thinking about how to enter the market, and if the product was good enough, she would ask for a share of the profits. She initially decided to take a walk to give it some more thought, and hearing swishing sounds, initially thinking it was a ghost, she tried to find the source, only to find Auntie and Erhardt chatting. Auntie would apologize before slashing Erhardt directly. Ellie couldn't understand what was happening. She jumped in front of the Duke to protect him, but Auntie would warn her to get away. It was dangerous. Erhardt's madness was emanating. Looking closer at him, she could see he was hurt all over. He apparently needed to see blood, whether it was his own or someone else's, to quell the madness. She took his hand, and he immediately calmed down, asking what she was doing here. He asked if she was scared of her, but she wasn't. If he had the intent to kill her because he lost his mind, she believed he would have hurt someone else by now. She was taken aback, seeing his wounds healing, but it wasn't from magic or divine power. His madness was truly something else. He then told her to go back inside, and that she should forget everything she saw tonight. She'd ask him if he was going to bed as well, but he couldn't sleep well because of the nightmares. So she offered to help him sleep, because she'd often help Damien and the other children when they would have nightmares back at the orphanage. She came off as bright and sparkling, but really, this was just another scheme of hers. She didn't think he'd actually say yes, but seeing how chiseled he was when he stripped, she had to squeal internally. She thought wearing a shirt must be uncomfortable with all that muscle. When he asked what she was doing, she jolted away. He then wanted to know how she was going to put him to sleep, and she thought of him as an arrogant cat. Well, she was glad he was willing to listen at least. She had him lie down so she could tuck him in, and he ended up looking like a burrito. The two would make small talk, and Earhart would suddenly ask her what her mother's name was. She got a little nervous before she uttered the name Shannon. She started thinking that maybe the Duke also hated her for being the daughter of a thief. He then told her he knew this was a ridiculous idea, and that she was horrible at helping people sleep. Then asked if she was sure the other children didn't have nightmares after her attempt to help them. As he began to slowly fall asleep, he apologized for the horrible things she had to see earlier, and also for suspecting her all this time. This warmed her heart. She was surprised he actually knocked out, but wished him sweet dreams nonetheless. Back in the city, the orphanage would be graced by a group of priestesses. Grace would see a younger one with green eyes, mistaking her for Ellie when it was a completely different girl. The girl thought it was quite strange, considering there should be no one else in this territory with green eyes, and wanted Grace to tell her more about her friend. Riding out with her priestess sisters, Ovely was disgusted, thinking about how she had to put her lips on an orphan's forehead to baptize them. She gritted her teeth, having found out there was a green-eyed child at the Duchy of Shoots. She'd suddenly panic, with the other priests mentioning her eyes looked almost orange today. Ovely would cover her face, making an excuse that she was feeling tired after blessing so many, and pretended to sleep for the rest of the way. She was pissed the potion wore off so quickly to the point her eyes turned back to normal. Livia Forgel's father scolded her. It was so expensive to send her to the temple. This was her true identity. He blamed Yuria, because had she not shown up in Earhart's life, his daughter would have become Duchess Shoots. They needed to find a way to free themselves from being the Empire's lapdogs. At first, Livia had done all this on her father's orders, but eventually found herself desperately wanting to become part of the Shoots family. She'd do anything to be by the Duke's side, even if it meant she had to marry Damien. She could never forget the time Earhart saved her, and would do anything to take Ellie's place. While the maids and Raynor cheered Ellie on for her excellent archery practice, the Duke would be smiling at her with pride from an upper story window. He'd go down to check on her to find Raynor carrying her in a strange way, but she was tired and wanted a bit of ease getting around. Earhart asked Raynor if he had children, and we learned he in fact had 3 sons. Earhart then took Ellie off of him to show the proper way to hold a child, and she was thinking, wow, this was so much more comfortable. Everyone else was stunned. The Duke then ran off with her to take her to eat, because despite her knowing she gained weight, he thought she looked quite gaunt. After a full-course meal though, she was exhausted, round, and pudgy. She then had him bring her to the swordsman training grounds to see Damien, and Damien was beaming over the fact she kept her promise to watch him train. He would quickly get upset, hearing she already ate with Earhart, and Earhart could see Damien still looked at him like he was the prey. The Duke smiled, thinking of the young boy as still just a puppy though. Damien whimpered and pleaded, asking Ellie, "You'll still eat with me from now on, right? I trained so hard too." And Earhart scoffed, thinking this was typical of a Collider, conniving at every opportunity. So he proposed that from now on, the 3 of them eat together. This caused Damien to sulk, and Earhart thought his reaction was pretty cute. For supper, the 2 guys were each giving plates for Ellie to try, both asking how she liked it. She munched, she chewed, she nibbled, and was up to her 10th plate at this point. Lady Vieira chuckled hearing the story of Damien and the Duke teasing Ellie last night. Ellie felt a little concerned about the tassel she wanted to give the Duke, because it looked to her like he didn't love the gift she gave him last time. But the Baroness told her not to think that way, and assured her he just wasn't good at expressing himself. Giving this type of knotted tassel had special significance. She promised Ellie it would mean a lot to him. Ellie would go to see Earhart with a lot of nervousness. Auntie would explain they were taking a small trip to patrol the duchy and would be away from the castle for a few days. Earhart would tell her not to cause any trouble while he was gone, and she told him she wouldn't because Franz, Lady Amanta, and Sir Garrett would be here with her. Unnoticeable to her, but obvious to everyone else, Earhart was a bit depressed since she was going to be adopted by the Amanta family soon. Before they'd take off, she'd present the knotted tassel she made with Lady Amanta. She felt it wasn't much, but it was supposedly a token that could keep the receiver safe. The Duke would take it, saying, "You did a pretty shabby job. I better hang on to it so I can tease you for the rest of your life." She'd pout over this, but he'd tell her he was just joking and that it was quite pretty. She'd feel her head, thinking of the pat. She was so happy he finally praised her for the first time. His words felt as big and warm as his hand. Later, by the mining site, Damien would get a feel of one of the newly crafted monster swords. Talon and Waybrock came by. Waybrock in particular looking pretty recovered. Talon would fixate on Damien, making the boy a bit nervous. He seemed to be quite impressed by Damien for some reason. Out in town afterwards, Ellie and Damien would enjoy some food by the market. She'd get a suspicious feeling someone was looking for her. She wondered who it could be, since the band of thieves wasn't around anymore. She tried to take Damien to find Garrett, but would stop because of a weird feeling, and smelled a rotten, foul stench. A hand would grab her, and she'd be separated from Damien. Where the Duke and Auntie were slaying monsters, Earhart would touch the tassel Ellie gave him. Earhart asked Auntie what it meant to be family, and Auntie answered it was hard to say. But generally, it meant that the parents would do anything for their children, and that their children would trust them as they continued to grow and develop. One of the knights then told Earhart to think of the Amantas considering Ellie as one of their own. That's what family was. And this would make Earhart mumble in depression. Auntie would whisper to the guy that he shouldn't be saying that. And Earhart wondered why people never talked about him that way. He'd do anything for those children too. He had no idea at this moment those very children were in trouble. But the maids would save Ellie and apprehend the man trying to take her away. Ellie assured Damien she was fine, but raising her hand, he'd be horrified over the sight of blood. The man apologized, saying he didn't do it on purpose. He was just worried his daughter would run away just like his wife. On the day his wife left, she told him their daughter had blonde hair and green eyes, just like he did. Garrett would come by to check on the commotion, and Ellie was stuck in her thoughts. She questioned if she could really be that man's daughter. Her mother never told her about her father, so she always assumed he'd be a homeless wanderer like her. But if he really was her dad, she wondered why he didn't come for her sooner. That's when Ovely would approach playing coy, going, "Oh my goodness, I told you not to stray too far," referring to the man. Grace would make her appearance as well, and that's when Ovely would lift her hood, explaining she was a priestess from the Great Temple of the North. Supposedly, she lived on the streets to aid those in emotional pain. This man was just that. He suddenly broke away, saying that he found his daughter, and she and Grace followed him. Ovely said he didn't do anything wrong, but that wasn't enough for Damien. He was pissed, since Ellie was the one that got hurt. He commanded Ovely to tend to Ellie's wounds, since she was a priestess. And thanks to his defense, Ellie didn't feel shaken anymore. She decided to think carefully and calmly about this situation. Since there was no way to confirm if this man was her biological father or not, she just needed to not let her emotions get the best of her. Can we pause for a sec? Did she forget she was reincarnated in this world? Why does she care whether or not this guy is her dad? Feeling a bit of pain, she asked Ovely to heal using her divine powers. But Ovely refused, saying priests were not allowed to use that unless absolutely necessary. She would bring out a flask of holy water instead. Ellie thought this was strange, having heard that priests always use their power for other nobles. So why not now? Damien would smack the bottle away, questioning if that really was holy water, because he smelled something rotten coming off of Ovely. Ovely/Livia got pretty pissed, asking him what in the world he was implying. She'd pause, thinking his eyes looked familiar, and wondered where she'd seen him before. Then, she thought back to the apothecary where she usually bought her eye-changing potion, and remembered there was a caged, blue-eyed boy, thinking he was filthy. He was that test subject from the apothecary. She had no idea he was the son of Duke Clyder. She scoffed, figuring that was how he knew it wasn't holy water, but also knew he had no way to prove it. She turned on a deceptive charm to respond, "What would it be if not holy water?" She wasn't going to let him ruin her plans. Grace went to bat to defend Ovely against Damien, and Ellie would break it up. She knew Damien wouldn't say something like that if he didn't have a reason, but at the same time, Ovely was a priest from the temple, and the temple and the emperor were close allies. They couldn't give them a reason to target him. If not holy water though, she pondered what it could be. The man would continue to insist Ellie was his daughter. He had a decent alibi, having always lived as a wanderer and claiming he didn't know his wife's name since she used multiple aliases. Ellie would buy into this somewhat, since it was true her mother was an infamous thief. It made sense she wouldn't reveal her true name. Then, Ovely would say this child and her parent had been brought together through God's providence, and she would confirm their relationship through the use of holy water. She went on further to explain every human was born with mana, and that mana connected to one's blood. Thus, if they let a couple drops of blood fall into holy water, which could measure mana, they'd be able to verify their relationship through its reaction. But, with her uttering, "I'm sure Duke Schutz also wants you to find your real family," Ellie had all her bad feelings about Ovely confirmed. How would anyone know she was living at the Schutz castle? They took Garrett's carriage to come to Pelline District today. There was no way for Ovely to connect her to the Schutz family like this, unless she approached with ulterior motives. It made even less sense considering the temple had a rocky relationship with Erhardt for a long time. This was because the temple used his madness as an excuse to meddle in House Schutz' affairs. Ellie felt she had to figure out what was going on. She put on her teary-eyed play, saying Erhardt had fallen ill since the day priests stopped visiting him. She asked Ovely to give her some holy water to help soothe his ailments. After Ellie got patched up by a doctor, she thought about Ovely's promise to bring holy water in 4 days' time, though Grace still seemed upset. The maids felt really bad about not keeping enough of an attentive eye on the kids, but Ellie assured them she was fine. This was a bittersweet feeling for her. Everyone here seemed to really care about her, just like Baroness Samantha. She was the daughter of a thief, and just here as the female lead's temporary replacement. She'd be gone soon enough, but still wondered why they cared so much. She'd then break the news that a priest was coming to the castle to test whether the man from earlier was her father or not, and so the maids agreed to send notice to the Duke. After they left, Damien admitted feeling guilty, saying if he hadn't let go of her hand, she wouldn't have gotten hurt. Ellie would try to take the blame off of him, because seeing him this way made her sad. She tried assuring him nothing could have been done, and posed a scenario of where she let go of his hand instead, and asked if it would be her fault. He would burst out, "No!" and she'd coddle him, telling him, "See, it was just an accident. No one's fault." She didn't want him to feel this way, especially since this was all her fault. None of these things happened in the original story. She blamed herself for why things were going awry, and she'd do whatever it took to fix everything so she didn't inconvenience anyone. She got to work, preparing a letter for some bait to deal with Ovely soon. The time would come when the temple carriage would arrive. Livia's first thought was about how this was the first time she's been here since she entered the temple, and that it wouldn't be long till this place belonged to her. At the same time, Ellie, in disguise, made a crystal ball call to the temple, reminding them of the letter she sent notifying them of a holy water thief. The priests were frantic on the other line, asking how she came upon this information, but she'd only respond that they'd better hurry, since they could only hold the thief for so long. Then she hung up. With her welcome gift ready for Ovely, she was ready to go meet them. Outside, Ovely was telling the man to just do the same thing he did last time, and she'd pay however much he wanted. He smirked, promising to do a phenomenal job. She still looked down on him for being nothing more than a filthy street rat, but his performance was pretty good, so that's all that mattered. Inside though, Livia would be distraught, finding out the Duke wasn't even here. He was still patrolling the duchy and wouldn't be back for a few days. She gave a fake smile on the outside, but on the inside, she thought about how she even used dark magic at the temple just so she could bring the holy water. She couldn't believe the Duke wasn't here, but then thought about how this was actually good, because without him, it'd be easier to kick Ellie out. She'd offer to start the testing right away, explaining she needed to draw Ellie's blood, and to not be afraid because God was protecting her. Ellie would act meekly, asking Ovely to give her a hug before they started, to ease her anxiety, and so they did. And Ellie said she was relaxed now. The man claiming to be her father then dripped his blood into a beaker, and it turned red. Avi explained once Ellie dripped hers, if it turned red again, then they were indeed related. Ovely thought she had won. It wasn't actually the man's blood inside, but instead, Ellie's blood she collected from the last time before coming here. But when she'd go to collect blood from Ellie now, Ellie would flinch in a way that caused the flask to drop and break. This made Ovely break character, shouting, "What do you think you're doing? Do you know how much effort I put into bringing this here? This is why I can't stand children." She'd stop, realizing she was making a scene, and apologized. Ovely tried bowing out for the day, saying she didn't have a second vial of holy water, which of course she did. That vial was for Erhardt, but Ellie would stop her, claiming the other one was in Ovely's robe. Ovely didn't understand how she knew initially, but then realized Ellie figured it out during their hug. Ellie then came close to Ovely's ear, whispering, "You know, sister, I never said I was staying at Duke Schutz's castle, but you somehow found me here." And now she was questioning how Ovely knew. In hindsight, Ellie thought back about how there were too many strange coincidences, and the foul odor Damien smelled was the nail in the coffin. Why would an angelic priest give off a foul odor? The answer was simple. This person was not a priest. Livia knew she was backed into a corner, having concealed the holy water near her chest. To make matters worse, another butler alerted Franz about another priest's arrival, and Livia's heart sank further. The priest apologized for the sudden visit and explained that he was informed that a priest who had stolen holy water had come here. He asked Sister Ovely to show what was in her robe, and she faltered, trying to say she knew nothing, while thinking the consequences would be way worse than kicking her out. Looking at Ellie, she began to crash out. Grabbing and shaking her, she accused Ellie of knowing everything here and calling him on purpose. She then scoffed, laughing maniacally, because if she couldn't be with the Duke, she would just kill everyone with her dark magic. Damien would stand in Ellie's way to protect her, and as Livia was about to deliver a fatal strike, Erhardt would intercept it and protect them. Livia was taken aback seeing him, and Raynor would quickly use this chance to pin her down. Her mind was breaking as they searched her for holy water. She couldn't believe Erhardt was doing this to her. They'd find it, and now Erhardt wanted to know what they were trying to do with his children. The blonde man would try explaining Ellie was his daughter, and Erhardt scoffed. Then, letting off his aura to intimidate, he asked the man if he was her father. Why wasn't he protecting her? Especially when the manic, bloodthirsty Duke Schutz was standing in front of her. Erhardt then asked Ellie if she really thought the man was her father, and if she wanted to go with him. In this moment, she felt trouble in her heart. Even if he was her father, she wanted to stay here, but wondered if she deserved to. Erhardt was practically shining as he told her she could stay if she wanted, and that being blood-related didn't always make people family. She questioned back if it really was okay, because she was the daughter of a thief, and everyone who knew that hated her for it. She called herself worthless, asking if she had the right to make a decision. Damien would then look at her with tearful eyes, telling her she did and that she wasn't worthless. The Duke smiled and felt since Damien stole his line, he'd take care of the rest as an adult should. He poured the holy water on the man claiming to be Ellie's father, and the magic disguise disappeared. The man then of course pinned the blame on Audley, but the Duke somehow already knew she was Livia Forgel. The green in her eyes would shift to their real orange, and as she pleaded for the chance to explain herself, he had his men take her away. Ellie wondered if Erhardt was going to scold her now, since he told her not to get into any trouble while he was away. However, she'd be met with him crouching down and consoling her with a somewhat sad face. She wondered why he looked so upset when she was barely even injured, as if the fact she got hurt was more concerning than this terrible situation. She felt strange. She suddenly felt tired and passed out onto him. While she slept with Damien at her bedside, the doctor would tell Erhardt this event likely triggered her trauma. He couldn't make a complete diagnosis without talking to her, but it appeared like she's been frequently exposed to situations like this for a long time, and this must have been her last straw. Erhardt thought back to those many times where she told him, "I will prove my usefulness to you," or "My reality was worse than any nightmares." He had to think about how she looked whenever she said those things. He felt foolish. She was just suppressing her pain all this time, and he had no idea. He would take out his anger on the head priest, stomping out the man while the priest begged for mercy. Erhardt then turned towards the other priests, threatening to deal with each of them, one by one. The priests would accept blame, explaining they didn't know someone had stolen holy water because the person in charge of it did his job poorly. As a way to make amends, they offered to do anything Erhardt asked them. And so, Erhardt told them he'd be sending the adoption approval papers to the temple soon, one under the name Schutz and one under Amanta, as well as marriage approval papers soon after. All they would have to do is stamp their seal of approval, since the temple handled adoption of all orphans in the kingdom. The priests were a bit worried about the marriage papers, because once approved, the imperial palace would definitely hear about it. But if they refused, Erhardt would probably kill them on the spot. With them accepting, the Duke chained them to a binding magic oath. The matter was settled, because if they crossed him, the spell would automatically kill them. In a dream world, Ellie found herself in some grasslands, spotting a monster getting near her. She questioned why, if this were a dream, did the monster feel so real? And then, light flashed from within her. When she woke up, Damien rushed to give her a hug. He was so scared. He thought she might never wake up, all because he couldn't protect her. He cried, and she apologized for scaring him. She promised not to let it happen again. As he held her close, pleading she never leave him alone again, she saw him as a sad little puppy. She knew it was wrong to think of him like that, but he was seriously cute. The Duke returned, commenting Damien beat him to it again. He already figured Ellie had asked for an extra vial of holy water as part of her plan, not just to blow Audley's cover, but because Uriel was gone, holy water was the only thing that could cure his mania. She tried to apologize, but he told her not to. He felt bad for letting her see his madness that one night, because if she hadn't, she wouldn't have been interested in a cure. He patted her head, telling her to just stay here and be a child, happy and carefree. The two children then wept with joy. At the palace, Emperor Ventus Lunari Lumentia received another daily report from his men. The peace truly bored him. The thrill of slaughtering people with his sword was still fresh in his mind. It had been 15 years since the war ended, and although he successfully defended the kingdom, he couldn't get his hands on the thing he wanted most. He thought it was such a pity that it no longer existed. He would call meeting adjourned, but would get interrupted hearing Count Rico Forgel had asked to see him. The emperor scolded the count, asking how incompetent he could be, having his daughter impersonate a priest of the temple, and the fact she got caught by Erhardt meant the reputation of the imperial palace would tank. Ventus contemplated on what to do. If the temple and Schutz's duchy found out the count worked for him, they might think he was behind the whole thing. He needed to find a way to get out of this. Entering in, Empress Carthea would ask if he was alright, claiming his problems were her problems. She told her husband not to worry, because despite the count's blunder, he at least came back with useful information. Even though Erhardt had clouded judgment due to his manic disorder, how could he not report that he found Duke Kleider's son to the emperor? House Kleider was no ordinary house. It's made great contributions to the empire's prosperity. She'd say, "Thinking about what befell it breaks my heart." The emperor scoffed. He already knew no one in the empire thought the Kleider family's death was simply a carriage accident. But the way his wife put on her performance, if he didn't know any better, he'd have fallen for it too. Her scheme was to let Damien inherit the merchant guild, so that they could pick a spouse for him. Ventus was so proud of his wife's wisdom. The wicked couple embraced, while feigning care and joy for young Damien. Carthea's inner motive was to serve Ventus so well, he'd never seek any woman besides her. She already suffered enough from a man's betrayal 15 years ago. Back at Schutz's castle, Ellie would sneak into the dungeon where she smelt an awful smell. It's exactly what she was looking for though, since she was trying to find Livia. In this world, dark magic was as dangerous as it was powerful. Since it went against the natural order of the world, it required a brutal price in return. She wanted to know from Livia who else knew about Damien, and how much they knew. Livia thought it was strange, since most people usually asked about her first, but now figured Ellie was no ordinary girl, already knowing she was Livia Forgel. That's because in the original story, Livia appeared around the same time Ashabel did. She was a villain whose love for Duke Schutz drove her to commit all kinds of evil acts. Livia would say the Emperor didn't know about this, because the pipe that the snake loves isn't here. She devoted her whole life to get into Schutz's castle, so she was glad that this was where she was going to die. She reached for Ellie through her cell, noting Ellie's eyes were a pretty enough color for him to miss forever and ever, before she passed out. After witnessing what happened to Livia and coming back from the dungeon, Ellie found herself in an awkward situation. The Duke was poking her cheek, talking about how despite feeding her so much, he could still pick her up with one arm. He thought she needed to eat way more, and considered banning everyone else from touching her cheeks, so only he could touch them. She was glad the Emperor didn't know who she was yet, but since the temple was involved, it'd only be a matter of time before he found out. She considered securing funds and preparing for the worst, but got distracted, wondering if Erhardt was going to poke her cheeks all day. Baron Marvin came with his son to apologize for his son's mistakes in not protecting Ellie back in town. She didn't blame Garrett. It's not like he knew this would happen, and thanks to him, they were able to catch Livia sooner than in the original story. She was going to tell them it was fine, but the Duke told her not to apologize so easily, reminding her she was going to be a member of House Schutz soon, and since they failed to protect her, they deserved to be punished. He demanded Garrett's head be hung outside the castle this instant. Ellie would struggle, telling him she didn't want the Amantas hurt in any way. She pleaded at first, but getting denied, she told him she'd skip lunch and wanted down immediately. And so, he decided to forgive them just this once. With the matter settled, they moved on to the important business. The Amantas were officially adopting Ellie. The father and son welcomed her, but Erhardt would shatter this, reminding her that after her wedding with Damien, her last name would be Schutz. So her real family name was House Schutz. Damien was so happy to hear he was going to be a real family with Ellie soon. The temple sent over the adoption approval without issue, and over at House Amanta, Ellie was shown a special tree bark. Garrett explained it was bark from a rugel, a tree that symbolized the east. Ellie wanted to know what a tree from the east was doing here in the north, and we learned it was the last present Erhardt got from Duke Kleider. They then demonstrated one of the bark's special properties. It absorbed water to an unusual degree. With the kids taking their leave, now that she was Ellie Amanta, she waved off, calling Marvin Grandpa. He found the term endearing and absolutely loved it. Later, Ellie would look at all the tree bark Garrett sent her, and greed entered her heart. She could use it to not only help her maids clean things with the bark, but also, with enough research, she could use it for financial independence. The two kids were spending peaceful times together. Damien gave Ellie a wreath to put on her head. However, they'd be interrupted by Wintia Salome gracing herself before them, who kindly asked to make wreaths with Damien. She was the daughter of Viscount Salome, a family that was distantly related to House Clyder. Ellie figured it wouldn't be easy for Erhardt to block these kind of people from visiting, because if he hid Damien, it might raise their suspicion. Damien expressed much wariness, but Ellie knew it wouldn't end well if they got on the bad side of Clyder's vassals. She didn't want to create unnecessary conflict. She convinced Damien to let Wintia play, but when she tried to teach Wintia how to pick the flowers, the girl ignored her and cut straight to asking what flowers Damien liked. Ellie tried helping again, but Wintia told her she wanted to play with Damien, not a servant. Ellie didn't like that, and now figured Wintia was ignoring her on purpose. However, Wintia's tune would change once Elia told her she was the newly adopted daughter of Baron Amanta. Wintia finally agreed that they could all play together, and rushed off to pick the roses, but suddenly tripped on a pebble. Wintia cried about it hurting so badly, and when Damien said they should bring her to the doctor, Wintia said her legs hurt and asked for his help. He sighed and picked Wintia up, and she started acting like a pygmy, going, "Thank you, Lord Damien." Wintia's nanny would rush to her side, concerned about Wintia's disheveled look. Mistaking Ellie for a servant, she blamed her for letting Wintia get hurt and threatened to tell His Grace Duke Schutz about this and hold her responsible. Big mistake. Because Erhardt would ask, "Hold who responsible? You're in my castle." Saying you'll hold my children responsible? I think she triggered his mania. The nanny bowed before Erhardt, but he would tell her he wasn't the one that needed the apology. Wintia's father would come to scold his daughter, reminding her they had plenty of flowers back home, but she never looked at them. He wanted to know why she was behaving so unlike herself today. She sniffled, explaining she thought red roses would look good on Erhardt, and wanted to give them to him herself. The Salome house men bought this, believing she hurt herself trying to get a gift, and that she was so kind-hearted. They also heard the late Duchess was very fond of red roses, which was why the greenhouse was so well managed. Ellie could see Wintia was trying to make her look like the villain, as if the Salomes were about to be executed, and she and Damien were the executioners. They were always looking for chances to tear Damien down, but Ellie refused to give that to them. She told Wintia in front of everyone she wasn't offended at all today, even though Wintia mistook her for a servant. Wintia got nervous being outplayed, and the other noblemen seemed to buy it. In private, Viscount Salome was berating his daughter for not being more subtle. He thought anyone could tell she hurt herself on purpose. The nanny tried to calm him down, and he'd smack her away. Hearing his daughter was sad for having to bow to someone else for the first time, he empathized. As a distant relative of Duke Clyder, he lived his entire life in the Duke's shadow. After the Duke died, he thought he finally had a chance, but it was all ruined by that will the Duke left. He still had hope for his daughter, telling her to never forget today's humiliation. Some orphan girl tried to take his daughter's place, and he wanted her to make Ellie pay. He wanted his daughter to succeed. That way, House Salome would be glorified forever. Wintia was overjoyed at the thought of Damien and everything else becoming hers. She promised not to let her father down. Pause. This is grooming and abuse. A parent shouldn't do that to a kid, man. On another day at Schutz Castle, Viscount Salome was hyping up his daughter to do what she could. He, meanwhile, was going to take care of the rest, believing he'd be able to get Damien somehow using a certain man who's come to visit. This man was Heron Hooper, the current head of the Merchant Guild, and the late Duke Clyder's mentor. Inside, Wintia would try greeting Damien, but he'd completely ignore her, until she grabbed his hand. He actually didn't even remember who she was initially, and pulled his hand away, telling her not to touch him without permission. And then, Roina would present him a letter from Ellie. Ellie asked how his training was, certain he worked very hard because that's the kind of person he was, and told him she had to go outside on her own for a bit today, but she wouldn't be long. Her thoughts of him warmed his heart. He immediately turned back to the knights and told them they were going back to the training hall. Since Ellie told him he was a hard worker, he wanted to prove it. The knights would cry over this because he had already been tirelessly training since this morning, but they'd have no idea Wintia was seething over Ellie. She'd never forgive her. Ellie had a pretty successful time trying out the Rugel bark, but would get suddenly hit with a stone to her ankle. Wintia would stand before her, raising a bigger rock. She then shouted, "Without you, I would have been Duke Schutz's daughter-in-law," and aimed for a headshot, but Ellie dodged it, then raised the water of the Red Lake up behind Ellie. Her plan was to tell her father Ellie pushed her into the lake as a way to make it seem like Ellie hurt her out of jealousy, but tripped and drowned in the lake herself. However, Ellie would ask if Wintia's eyes were okay, and Wintia squealed, having gotten some of the Red Lake's water into her eyes. Wintia blamed Ellie for always getting in her way while calling her a filthy orphan. Her father told her orphans were filthy, uncultured beings that did nothing but taint the Empire. Ellie would interrupt Wintia to call Talem, and Wintia couldn't comprehend the mass of crows flocking towards them. Ellie had the edge here. Wintia ended up getting so scared, she passed out. Whoops. Ellie meant to only scare her a little. During another Clyder House vassal meeting, Urquhart called in Damien, who pretty much ignored the other noblemen. The Viscount would then make the request to have Urquhart return Damien to them, but if not, for the sake of solidarity between the merchant guilds, he wanted a marriage between Damien and his daughter. Urquhart scoffed, telling them he hadn't heard such BS in a long time. Viscount Salome tried to object, saying all they wanted was for Lord Damien to return to his normal life as quickly as possible. And to this, Urquhart would say they didn't even care what his life has been like so far, or what he's gone through. But now, they were claiming to have Damien's best interests at heart? He couldn't understand how that wasn't BS. He reminded them what Duke Clyder left in his will to them was the Merchant Guild, not Damien. He was getting pissed. Suddenly, Roina would burst into the meeting to say Ellie and Wintia were hurt. The men would rush over. Damien and Urquhart would check on Ellie, while Wintia's father would check on her. Ellie couldn't believe the crying performance Wintia was putting on, considering she was the one that actually got hurt. The Viscount, meanwhile, was thinking this was good. This was his chance to bring everyone onto his side. He looked over at Ellie, begging her to stop tormenting his daughter. Urquhart would not have this though, asking instead what Wintia had done to his daughter. Wintia continued the crocodile tears, saying, I only wanted to befriend Miss Ellie, but she pushed me into the lake. The Viscount went on, adding his daughter could have died in the freezing weather, all because of that lowly girl. That's when Damien would suddenly pour a cup of water over him. The Viscount didn't understand the meaning of this, but Damien checked him, explaining pouring water didn't get him fully soaked. If he had been pushed into a lake, he would have been soaked from head to toe, but instead, he was just a little wet, like his daughter. The Salome father and daughter were at a loss. The Viscount struggled with excuses, claiming Wintia's dress could have just dried by now, and the lake was unordinary, so maybe the water might dry faster. Ellie then told Wintia she shouldn't lie, because even though they were in the forest, someone might have seen them. Wintia flinched, thinking of the crows. She couldn't accept this as her fault. She then wailed out that her father told her Damien should be hers. Wintia cried on and on, asking what was wrong with her punishing Ellie, while Urquhart kept getting angrier and angrier. The rest of the men walked out, calling an end to this meeting, thinking it was foolish of the Salome family to try to hurt a child in Urquhart's care. Urquhart was sulking a bit, pointing out that Ellie was getting hurt so often these days. He wanted to know when she was going to stop making his heart drop. Damien was sad as well, reminding her she broke her promise to stop getting hurt. This was only the beginning though. Urquhart told her things like this will keep happening, and once they found out whose daughter she was, they'd become even more vicious. But no matter what, he promised to protect her, because he was the adult. All he wanted the two of them to do was run around and play in nature all day, and go to bed at night, looking forward to an exciting new day. That's what children were supposed to do. Ellie took it in, wondering if this was how it felt to have a father, to have someone who accepted her for who she was. This made her feel compelled to do something alike for Damien. She touched his cheek, telling him she'd always be by his side to shield him from anyone who tried to hurt him. She then asked if he wanted to get married. Damien blushed, as he asked if it meant they'd be in a relationship like she talked about before. He wondered if he should have prepared a ring, since it was a proposal. He then answered, okay, and she took his hand, telling him he couldn't take it back now. Heron then stepped in. Having listened in to the whole thing, he introduced himself to the two kids, telling them he'd be taking care of them from now on. Ellie remembered Heron was the man who kept the Merchant Guild successful after Duke Clyder's passing. This man was more passionate about verifying Damien's suitability than anyone, and Damien went through a terrible ordeal because of it. It was only when Damien turned 15 and fought in the war that Heron finally accepted him as the rightful heir. This man was fiercely loyal to Clyder, so Ellie knew if they could win him over, he'd provide a good stepping stone for Damien and become someone she could rely on as well. Having her first meeting with Heron, Ellie entered a room filled with toys from all over the world. It also had exquisite desserts on the table: strawberry cream cake, cakes topped with chocolate syrup, fluffy pudding under glistening layers of caramel syrup, and many more. If she were a real child, Ellie would feel like she was in heaven. She wondered why Heron called her here private. She'd start eating some candy from a candy basket, and Heron arriving made her a bit nervous. Before he'd begin their lesson, he asked her for a piece of candy. She wasn't expecting that. She was about to give him some, but paused, thinking she should never take anything he did at face value. She was an orphan who became a duke's adopted daughter overnight. She went from the lowest of the low to a place everyone was envious of, so he must be worried she'd become arrogant. She considered the fact he asked her to have something from the basket, even though there were so many other desserts in the room. This had to be part of the test. In that case, she offered pudding instead, noting that it was soft and going to be much easier on his teeth. Heron thanked her for being considerate, since his teeth were a little weak now that he was old. His granddaughter loved pudding too. He mentioned she was around Wintia's age, then admitted he didn't come here to give Ellie a lesson, but instead to ask her to forgive the Salome family. The Salomes possessed powerful psychokinesis that has been passed down for generations, and that power made the distribution of the Merchant Guild's goods a lot easier. Without their help, the Merchant Guild would find itself in a tough position, although their punishment was well deserved for trying to harm her. Ellie pondered on this, knowing Heron was not wrong, but also he wouldn't dare ask Erhardt to spare their lives. That's why he came to her, knowing if she asked him, he might change his mind. She thought about how to respond in a way that would satisfy. Heron, meanwhile, thought she was silent for a while now. He thought she'd be capable, considering how she handled the Salomes, and her offering him a pudding just now. He wondered if he was wrong. He then presented a piece of paper, asking for her signature on a document that lightened the Salomes family sentence, and she signed it. With their time coming to an end, she asked him when the next lesson would be, and as he took his leave, he thought about what an innocent and lovely child she was. But his verification was complete. He thought it was too bad, since he really enjoyed the pudding. He'd bring the document to Erhardt, telling him to keep his promise, that if she signed this fake document, he'd retract his punishment for the Salomes. Erhardt chuckled, seeing Ellie completely outsmarted Heron. Heron didn't understand what was wrong until Erhardt told him to look at her signature again. She signed it Ellie Amanta Kleider. In the Empire, signatures end with the name of the head of the family, so all she had to write was Ellie Amanta. And although Damien was adopted by Erhardt, he was still Duke Kleider's son. By connecting Kleider, Erhardt, Schutz at the end of her signature and giving it to Heron, she made him acknowledge the fact she was not only Damien's wife, but that Damien was a Kleider as well. Ellie completely checked him. Heron would head back, still finding Ellie sitting in the room. She admitted knowing he'd been testing her, and with this, he accepted his loss and graced himself before her, officially reintroducing himself as a mentor to her from now on, and she smiled brightly, greeting him back. She later received many days of economic lessons from Heron. He was very forward-thinking, telling her to think about the value of money as much more than titles. Because once the value of money dropped, titles would become worthless, and wealth disparity would reach an all-time high. While reading the Merchant Guild documents, Ellie would notice they hired a lot of female employees, despite there being prejudice for that in this society. To Heron, though, it didn't matter whether someone was male or female. All he cared about was whether someone was qualified to work. Ellie began to fixate on something that bothered her in regards to this. She remembered before going away to the orphanage, she had a close relationship with a woman who had a newborn and needed lots of diapers for her baby. But since peasants couldn't afford disposable diapers, she had to use reusable fabric ones. The woman grew tired of washing them every day. Ellie assumed the female employees felt the same. That's when she'd suggest the Rugel trees that Garrett showed her, the same ones that could absorb a lot of liquid, to be used for diapers. Now Heron was sparkling and asking to meet Garrett right away. He and Heron would work together to create diapers made of Rugel, and parents would rate the diapers 5 stars. They'd even use it to make pads for women on their periods, and adult diapers for elderly parents. Ellie had one. She then suggested they sell the pads to the guild's employees at cheaper than market price to drive up sales, and also provide a certain amount of pads for free to staff members who were fertile women or women with children under 3. This was her idea to get more women who wanted to work into the Merchant Guild. A few days later, the Mareep orphanage received a huge donation of new pads and diapers. Ellie was glad everything went according to plan, because when she was in the orphanage, a lot of younger children went to bed at night, getting scared of the dark. But they didn't have luxury items like diapers, so they had to wash their blankets with their own hands in the morning. And as soon as girls turned 13, they got kicked out of the orphanage because their menstruation made keeping them costly. The children would grow to be adults and may repay Kleider Merchant Guild for helping them when they were young. Ellie had forgotten, but this was the orphanage Grace was staying at. Grace began shedding tears, having inadvertently hurt Ellie by telling the priestess about her. Ellie could see Grace blamed herself for what Livia did, but it was actually thanks to her that Ellie was able to take care of Livia faster than in the original novel. Otherwise, more people would have fallen victim to her. She hugged Grace to assure her everything was fine. The sale of pads was officially launched. Ellie was so pleased over the positive report she received that she still hadn't touched her desserts today. Earhart wondered when she was going to eat, and she wondered how she ended up on his lap, having only come here for the report. As he fed her some treats, she was sent to outer space. She especially loved chocolates. Garrett and Heron then entered to report this week's sales. Garrett in particular seemed a bit nervous, despite the fact everything was going successfully. So, Ellie offered him some chocolate to boost his energy. Garrett was touched, but before he could partake, the Duke would snatch it. Ellie asked him why, since he had a lot of chocolates, and he just answered, I don't know. The man didn't even like sweets. Garrett suggested they donate to other places besides orphanages, particularly academies where most students lived in the dormitories. The children there would someday become adults, and those children could become future customers. Earhart approved, so Ellie gave him a chocolate to thank him, and surprisingly, he accepted again. She thought of him as like some big, ambivalent cat. Heron then mentioned it being time Earhart started preparing for the wedding between Damien and Ellie, because the sooner the two would wed, the sooner they'd be safe. Earhart asked Ellie about it, and she was over the moon, replying, I like Damien, so I'm definitely going to marry him. The word definitely broke Earhart. Ellie got so excited, she ran off to go tell Damien, and Earhart complained that raising a daughter was such a thankless job. With the wedding only a week away, Schutz's castle got busy with preparations. Damien had been working his hardest, studying all day under Heron after his sword training lessons. Heron was surprised since they only started recently. Damien was already at an advanced level. Heron brought up the new product developed by Ellie, and Damien gave a fierce glare hearing her name, before brightly replying, I see. I knew Ellie had it in her. This was all Heron needed to confirm Damien was indeed a Clyder as much as a Clyder could be. The past heads of House Clyder were all fiercely devoted husbands who never went against their wives. At the same time, they were cold and ruthless towards their enemies, but they never let their wives see that side of them. Heron was sure Ellie had never seen the look Damien just gave. Damien began to look at the window and wonder what Ellie was up to. He missed her often these days, considering he was so busy. He usually only saw her at bedtime. He wouldn't have to wonder for long though, because she began tapping at the glass he was looking at. She quickly took him out to escape, while Heron was distracted by a rambling maid. Outside, she decided they were going to have a snowball fight. Damien found her fascinating. Even though she was right in front of him, he didn't want to be away from her for even 1 second. His heart was beating so rapidly. By the time they were done playing, they were laying in the snow. They had so much fun, they accidentally ended up by the Red Lake. Ellie started thinking about the curse of the lake that had drowned many, but then pondered, well, if it was indeed cursed, why did it not contaminate the land around it? The trees here, in fact, looked so much healthier than others. Ellie tried thinking back on if the original story ever talked about the lake, and remembered the female lead Ashabel presented some pristine gems colored the same ruby red as Earhart's eyes. In the story, those were discovered to not just be some gems, but rather red divinity stone. Typical mana stones turned to regular stones when mana ran out, but divinity stones were different. Once mana was injected into them, they could be used indefinitely. Thanks to the divinity stone, House Schutz gained power equaling that of the temple, and Earhart went from suspecting Ashabel was the temple's spy to opening up his heart to her. Ellie questioned if the divinity stones came from this very lake. Chatting a bit, Damien explained in his recent lessons, he learned that in ancient times, a lot of people grew plants using magic. Magic had its foundation in nature, and nothing absorbed mana as well as life did. This gave Ellie important insight, so she called Talum, and with him appearing and transforming from crow to human form, Damien was taken aback. She then had him transform back to peck at a tree, and from it dropped a divinity stone. Ellie hit the jackpot. Heron was about to scold them back at the study room, until he heard they discovered the stone. This explained why most people died from mana surge, rather than drowning in the lake. Mana surging occurred when people were forcefully injected with more mana than what they possessed. Heron was concerned, because the discovery of the divinity stones was bound to cause the Schutz Duchy and temple to drift even further apart. Ellie felt a bit guilty, because in the original novel, Ashabel mediated the conflict between Schutz and the temple. But she ain't in the story now, so what does that matter? With Heron presenting the stone to Earhart, it made him think about his late wife, because she wanted a red jewel that resembled his eyes. She wanted to get him a jewel too, a green one, like her eyes. He wished he had told her then that no color in this world, was beautiful enough to resemble her. He ordered Heron to release the stones into the Eastern market without revealing their divinity stones for the time being. If the stones were sold at a low price, the temple, which had a monopoly over them, would have to lower their price to stay competitive. He was trying to make it harder for the temple to secure funds as a way to get them to approve the marriage certificate. Urhart had already taken care of the Northern Temple, but the Eastern Temple had yet to approve the marriage certificate. The temple was using a loophole in the oath to pretend they hadn't received the certificate in the first place, so he needed to put pressure on them. Thus, a Manta Merchant Guild officially released divinity stones into the Eastern market, and they became a common product in that region. Priestess ladies would be shocked one day to see a local vendor using a stone to keep fish fresh all day. The Eastern Temple, afraid that the value of the divinity stones might decrease, managed to get Duke Schutz to recall all divinity stones before most merchants found out about the true value of them, in exchange for approving the marriage certificate. And finally, the anticipated wedding day arrived. Ellie felt a bit strange looking at herself in wedding attire, but the maids would gush over her. When Auntie came in to compliment, her heart suddenly shoved him out of the way, saying, "Who said you could see the bride?" He knelt down, telling Ellie she looked absolutely beautiful. She could see he was still wearing the knot she gave him. She wondered why he looked so upset, like a father on the day of his daughter's wedding. He then asked to play the role for father, just for today, because it was the father who walked the bride down the aisle. He offered his hand, asking, "Shall we, daughter?" And with her replying, "Yes, Dad," the two walked out together. Most of the men were shocked to see them, because for some reason, Urhart was scowling, even though he was just smiling a minute ago. Despite his fierce look, he claimed he was incredibly happy. The two children stood side by side and Ellie gave Damien a sweet kiss on the cheek. Damien got flustered and jolted back. He'd never experienced that before, but they couldn't be pronounced husband and wife without it. The guests cheered, and Urhart congratulated Ellie on becoming a real part of their family. Once known as the daughter of a thief with filthy blood, today she gained a new name and new family. Vieira would come up to Ellie during the after party, relieved now that no one would be able to hurt Ellie as easily, especially the Emperor. Hearing this, Ellie was now worried the Emperor might go after Duke Schutz and Damien, and was more than prepared to divorce Damien when the time came. In the evening, at the Imperial Palace of the Tarab Empire, Empress ComfyTea was alerted by her maid about her husband spending the night with another green-eyed woman. ComfyTea chuckled, wondering what she should do. She couldn't kill every single woman with green eyes. It had been 15 years. She thought at this point, Ventus should have given up, but he was still stuck in the past. Even though she knew he was like this, there was a time when she was convinced she could win his heart. But funnily enough, he even made her half-sister, who looked just like her, his mistress. They looked like they could be twins, even though Layli was her polar opposite in every other aspect. ComfyTea summoned her informant and learned about Damien's marriage. A marriage not permitted by the Imperial Palace was as good as treason, but the Duke was not someone who could easily be punished. Learning Damien was 11, the same age as her son, Matteo, she considered making them good friends. A few days later, Ellie would be brought to a salon Garrett opened up. Using divinity stones, Garrett was able to make perfect curling irons that didn't burn hair. The salon was luxurious, having both a coffee house and private rooms on the first floor. Pads were also kept well in stock at all times for when customers needed them. That way, they could introduce them to noble women and get the upper class to buy them in the future. The only problem was that his hairdresser and tailor were constantly fighting. Charlotte, the hairdresser, constantly got upset at Flint, the tailor, for mistakenly using her scissors, which of course, to her, were only meant for cutting hair. Flint was pretty dense. Garrett thought the two would be a good combo because he needed a tailor, and Charlotte was good at picking colors, but was scared their fighting might scare the customers. Ellie was initially concerned that the two might quit, but they'd soon come back, with Flint helping Charlotte in every way he could. Flint was in fact so loyal to Charlotte, during their academy days together, he was nicknamed the Doberman. Ellie could now see Flint was in love with her. Gemul's salon was extremely popular with its concept of hair curling and tailor-made clothes for its customers at the same time. The line was so long that even the coffee house was filled to capacity. The salon became the main topic of tea time conversations amongst noblewomen, who were very sensitive to trends. On a day where the kids were enjoying treats with Urhart, Auntie would present a letter with the imperial crest. ComfyTea gave belated congratulations on the marriage and invited them to the imperial palace for a proper celebration, especially since the kids had yet to have a debutante ball. Children of other noble families would also be in attendance to help them get introduced into high society. If Ellie were a noble lady, she would have been happy to attend the debutante ball. But the current Empress of Tarab was ComfyTea, Count Lachenel's only daughter. And Ellie's mother died after getting caught trying to steal something from House Lachenel. Ellie was thankful she and her mother had no physical resemblance, but since there were people who knew Ellie's identity, she was concerned ComfyTea might know who she was. Her heart comforted Ellie, letting her know she could live comfortably for the rest of her life with family fortune and no name known in high society. But she decided she'd go. She didn't want to live in hiding forever. She wasn't afraid, knowing she had him and Damien. On the day of the ball, Prince Mateo sat outside, noting the noisiness while enjoying his tea, thinking about how she was going to be here. Prior to the ball, while Ellie was getting ready, her heart gave her a necklace as good luck to protect her. He couldn't go because of his busy schedule. At the annex of the Imperial Palace, Ellie was initially intimidated over how big it was, but calmed herself, remembering how Schutz was also rich. Walking around, she noticed the other children were whispering amongst themselves over her commoner status, until Rita, the head maid, arrived. With the maid giving Ellie a particular glare, Ellie was afraid she might know who she was. But that was put aside as the maid began explaining she was here to teach them all proper etiquette and preparation for the ball. Hearing they'd be separated by gender to start off, Ellie felt something was wrong. Damien didn't want to let her go either, but she decided to stay strong, telling him not to worry because she'd see him soon. Once separated, Ellie noticed the girls were leaving her out of any conversation on purpose. She began thinking about another character in the plot, Lady Adelan, who at the moment was just a little kid no one paid attention to, but would eventually become a famous opera singer and queen of high society. Adelan's backstory was particular in that she used to be the princess of the Kingdom of Rivens, which was a small magical kingdom, but after losing the war, all of its citizens faced the threat of death, only surviving because the King of Rivens gave up all its soldiers and magic books to the Empire, saving their citizens. Riven's citizens, however, failed to understand why their king did this, so Adelan, as a result, had a rough childhood. The most common phrases around the kingdom were, "The king bowed to the emperor to save himself," and "He sold us to the empire." A snark, red-haired girl named Clora said, "If I were her, I would have been too ashamed to even step foot in the Empire. But I guess some people just don't know how to stay in their place." Ellie remembered Clora was a noble lady who would end up being Adelan's biggest bully, so the person in front of Clora must be Adelan. Ellie knew dealing with this was none of her business, but it was uncomfortable for her to see a child who had trauma like Damien and herself, and so she made a gracious step to introduce herself to young Adelan Rivens. Suddenly, a foot kicked the door open, and Prince Mateo made his entrance, immediately going to mock Adelan for being the princess of a fallen kingdom. His mother mentioned her, so he got curious. Ellie was shocked to see him, because she knew Mateo would grow to be one of the main antagonists, and the gem he was playing with used to belong to the late Empress, Prince Fabian's mother. The book said he frequently stole the late Empress's things to mess with Fabian. Ellie decided to intervene to stop the bullying, and when she introduced herself, Fabian recognized her as the commoner girl, adopted to marry into the Schutz family. He scoffed, calling her a vermin, and grabbed her face, but stopped when he saw her green eyes. He remembered his mother telling him about how green eyes signified one's closeness to the world tree, and about how his father and those of House Lumencia have obsessed over green eyes for generations. When he asked his mother if his father loved his green-eyed mistress, ComfyTea answered that woman was nothing more than a mistake he made, and that green-eyed women were all vile creatures. Mateo couldn't understand his father until now, but seeing Ellie, he was beginning to. He decided to take Ellie's necklace as the price for disrespecting him. She tried to take it back, so he offered the late Empress's gem instead, telling her if she wanted her necklace back, she'd have to see him later with a proper apology. Adelan felt bad about getting Ellie involved, but it was all good, because she had taken Mateo's pocket watch, and she was going to make use of it. Where the first Prince Fabian was asking one of the attendants if they saw Mateo holding his things, the attendant would soon step away and find Ellie presenting them, claiming she found the late Empress's gem and the pocket watch at the incineration plant. The man would take them off of her, and before he'd leave to go put them back in their proper place, Ellie would tell him about a red gem her friend lost. Soon after, she'd bump into Prince Fabian, wondering what the supporting male lead was doing here. She had a small interaction with him, but got out as soon as she could. Although solely for the sake of Ashabel, she knew Fabian would eventually help Damien attack and take down the Empress. Everyone was murmuring over Damien just sitting and reading his book. Another boy, the son of Viscount Salome, figured Damien was Clyder's son, but couldn't make sense of it because of how wimpy Damien looked. He thought if Damien married his sister Wintia like his father intended, then he in turn could make Ellie his mistress. He wanted to put Damien in his place first though. The boy at first tried telling Damien this wasn't a book club, but was ignored. He would then tell Damien he was being rude for treating people like this, but Damien didn't see him as a person. This really pissed the boy off into disrespecting House Shoots and calling Damien's wife a nameless low-born orphan girl. So Damien socked him in the face, knocking him to the ground. Damien remembered Earhart telling him not to engage in mindless fighting, unless it was with subhuman creatures, and that luckily, the Imperial Palace was full of them. He told Damien to stay strong, because nothing was more worthless than a husband his wife couldn't be proud of. Damien took this to heart, telling the boy he'd never tolerate subhuman creatures like him. Ellie, meanwhile, was looking for where the boys were getting their lesson, and two boys pointed her in the direction before running off. She'd soon find Damien with a bruise on his face, and the two held each other close. That evening, ComfyTea and the princess had dinner with Emperor Ventus. The emperor would notice the necklace around Mateo's neck, and Mateo nervously explained he got it from Adelan Rivens. His mother was proud of her boy, claiming he knew how to cherish gifts from people, and then mentioned the pocket watch his father gave him when he was born. She pointed out that Mateo cherished it so much that he never went anywhere without it. But when Mateo tried to reach for the watch, he was shocked because it was missing. Mateo knew he was in hot water because his father hated when people disrespected gifts from him more than anything. And so, ComfyTea told Mateo to call the servants, thinking one of them must have it, but none of Mateo's personal ones did. That's when one of ComfyTea's own servants would come by, explaining he had the watch. The emperor thought something was strange, and the atmosphere was awkward. The servant, trying to save his skin, handed over the pocket watch and the late empress's gem. He then explained a young noble lady asked him to give these two things back to their rightful owner, saying she found them at the incineration plant. Mateo began to shout that was nonsense, and accidentally blurted out that he had stolen the late empress's jewel. Having caught Mateo in a few lies now, Ventus would question if his son had really gotten the necklace from Adelan. But this was all a ruse. He didn't care if his boys lied. What Ventus really wanted was to intimidate ComfyTea, who he knew was hiding her ambition under the facade of a sweet and loving wife. Fabian then mentioned the girl who was actually looking for the necklace Mateo had, and thus, Mateo was forced to answer he had stolen it from Duke Schutz's daughter-in-law. This got the emperor to glare at his wife. He wanted her to explain what was going on, considering she told him Duke Schutz was going to marry his son to the daughter of House Salome. A marriage that hadn't been approved by the Imperial Palace was a blatant challenge to his authority. He couldn't believe not only did his wife neglect to tell him about it, but she personally invited Duke Schutz's daughter-in-law to the debutante ball. He felt there was no one he could trust. With dinner coming to an end, the emperor handed Fabian back his keepsake from his mother. Fabian was glad he got it back, but wondered why Ellie was so nice to him. While lying about not knowing anything about the jewel, he watched her set up his brother from afar, and it made him chuckle. He wondered when he'd see her again. ComfyTea, meanwhile, was getting flashbacks to what happened just before her wedding. Over a decade ago, at House Lachenal, she had tried to frame her sister Laylee for stealing a divinity stone, but Laylee ended up framing another maid in the house instead. Looking again at the jewel around Mateo's neck, she noticed the shine resembled the divinity stone she tried to frame her sister with, and ordered her servant to go get the Imperial Mage. The mage determined it was a divinity stone, and ComfyTea would test its power by burning her servant to ashes. She'd step where the servant once stood, and decided to take the stone with her. The next day, a priest would soon be chastised by the royal couple over approving a marriage without their permission. He wondered why they were blaming the temple, since Count Forgel was responsible for all this, and the imperial family owned him. They'd tossed the divinity stone before the priest, and Emperor Ventus figured since the priest recognized it right away, he must have known what was going on all along. He was furious that the temple and that murderous bastard, Earhart, had hidden this from him. Since ComfyTea's family mine no longer seemed to have a monopoly over the stone, he considered relying on Baron Welsh as a source of income, who seemed to have a newly discovered mine. But he'd soon be shocked to hear from his wife that the mother of Duke Schutz's daughter-in-law was her sister, Laylee, the woman who stole his treasure 15 years ago. A week passed, and Ellie visited the Imperial Palace once more to prepare for the debutante ball. During that time, she heard Prince Mateo had been grounded. She'd hang out with Adelan at Gemmuel Salon's coffee house, and Adelan was quite surprised. She heard this place was hard to get into, but of course, Ellie had the family connection. They overheard Clara laughing outside their private room, bragging about how her father had more than enough money to buy the place. She'd show off a brand new violet diamond discovered by her family mines, hoping to put the orphan girl and princess of the fallen kingdom in their place. She had no idea Ellie actually had the upper hand here. While Charlotte got Clara measured up for her dress, Garrett would express his disdain over Clara, laughing, saying, "Name your price," for buying Gemuel Salon. It's not like the Amanta family was short on funds, but they knew they might be in trouble with the rising value of the newly discovered violet diamonds. Ellie knew there was no reason to be concerned though, because those diamonds were fake. In the original story, Baron Welsh was a lecherous gambling addict who almost went bankrupt, but Carthia's father, Count Lachenel, made him a proposition, making a fake diamond mine and selling the diamonds. They easily pulled it off with the help of Count Forgel and jewelry inspectors bribed by the Empress. Thus, Baron Welsh became a millionaire. After that, the Empress would inherit the mine from Baron Welsh, becoming a millionaire herself, with 2 diamond mines at her disposal, and the Baron gained the support of the Empress, although their hoax would be exposed in the end, thanks to Ashabel's divine power. Ellie felt she couldn't let things play out since she knew the truth. She couldn't stand the Empress, or Clara, but most importantly, hated the idea of Damien becoming a victim of their scheme. Time passed, and the day of the debutante ball arrived. Most of the women were anticipating the arrival of Duke Schutz and his adopted son who married a peasant girl. Despite his natural scowl, they couldn't help but discuss his handsomeness. But when he'd take the hand of his daughter-in-law, they couldn't believe a peasant girl had such elegance. The Duke never thought he'd come to the imperial palace voluntarily, but he was glad to see his kids were having such a good time. Inside, they were met by Prince Mateo and his dance partner, Clara Welsh, whose dress adorned the sparkling violet diamonds. Clara loved being the center of attention, having a dress made by Gemuel Salon topped with her family's violet diamonds. The Empress made her Prince Mateo's partner for the event, so she was sure anyone would think she was the future crown princess. Bowing to Mateo for escorting her, he was gritting his teeth at Ellie for getting him in trouble. Clara misinterpreted this as Mateo putting his attention on Ellie and felt humiliated. Seeing how things were going, Ellie told Damien that even if someone was rude to her, to just let it slide for today. She had a plan. When the royal couple made their entrance, Ellie noticed Ventus making a quick glance at her, but thought maybe it was just her imagination. The ball commenced, with Mateo and Clara having the opening dance. The people clapped, thinking the two made a great couple. Soon after, they turned their attention to the newlyweds of House Schutz, leaving Clara more angry and more jealous. The Schutz couple began their dance, and Ellie was so thankful she was allowed a happiness like this. Then Adelan appeared, and Ellie had to compliment her dress. Adelan asked Ellie to dance with her, and the 2 girls rushed off, making Damien concerned because he needed to protect Ellie. While the 2 girls were dancing, Clara would bump into Ellie and crash over. Clara was playing the crying, teary-eyed victim, and Ellie knew if she didn't do something, she'd end up looking like the villain. Damien would rush to Ellie's side, while Baron Welsh would come to his daughter. The Baron would say, "How dare you hurt my daughter? And have you lost your mind?" That's when Erhardt would tell him to shut up. The Baron would blame Erhardt, saying this happened because he was too easy on Ellie. But Erhardt would turn this around by saying if Ellie really bumped into Clara hard enough for her diamonds to fall out, then Clara's dance partner would have fallen with her. However, he was standing with no signs of ever having fallen. But if that wasn't the case, then perhaps Clara's dance partner was so perceptive and athletic that he let go of his falling partner's hand in time to avoid being hurt. The Baron and his daughter were embarrassed either way. It was either she smashed herself into Ellie on purpose, or her dance partner just tossed her away like trash. Out of frustration, the Baron revealed what he learned from the Empress, that Ellie was the daughter of the thief who stole the imperial family's treasure, and that since that wretch joined the Schutz family, they must have lost all the class they had. Now the guests were clamoring about the thieving girl, supposing Ellie might have bumped into Clara to steal her diamonds. But Ellie grinned, saying those diamonds were fake, and that she'd never want fake jewels. The Baron couldn't believe this preposterous claim. He lunged at her, but came crashing down from a glint of Damien's aura. Damien apologized to Ellie, but he couldn't hold back anymore. And now the people were talking about how Damien could already use aura at such a young age. Erhardt then summoned a blade, reminding the Baron he said he lacked class. And so, he had to prove the Baron right by drawing blood whenever something made him angry. The Baron cowered, as Erhardt was about to strike. But Ellie stopped him. If he had killed the Baron, her plan would have been ruined. The Empress called a stop to this as well, and with Ellie now seeing her for the first time, She was caught off guard by ComfyTea's red hair and purple eyes, the same as her mother had. She couldn't believe she compared her mother to ComfyTea, because the two were nothing alike. She believed her mother was a good person. Clara expressed to the Empress how upset she was that Ellie called her diamonds fake and demanded her punishment. The Empress would speak on understanding why a child like Ellie would lie about something like that, but said it was surprising such an esteemed man like Erhardt would assume the claim was true. Ellie could see ComfyTea was trying to use her age to damage Erhardt's reputation for supporting her. So, she'd press on that she wasn't lying, because it was Livia Forgel who told her. Now the crowd was gasping and murmuring things like, how does a former peasant girl know Forgel? And that House Forgel was known for dark magic, so her claims were not out of the realm of possibility to be used for making fake diamonds. Ellie had her ace. The fact that a thief's daughter and peasant knew about House Forgel, the lapdog of the imperial family, was enough to sow the seeds of doubt. ComfyTea underestimated her because she was a child, and it came back to bite her. Erhardt then added the last thing Livia said was, there was a snake here. Ellie didn't know he knew this. She thought those were the words of someone just rambling on their deathbed. But Livia had also said, the pipe that the snake loves isn't here. To him too. Emperor Ventus then made his move next, commenting that Erhardt's love for his daughter-in-law was impressive, and wanted to know why Erhardt hadn't told him about the divinity stones. His silence on this matter could only be interpreted as disloyalty. Erhardt answered it wasn't on purpose, but that the discovery of a disgraceful person would not be accepted anywhere, because the one who discovered the stones was his daughter-in-law. It was the Empire's law that when a parent commits a crime, their child is seen as guilty as well, which meant everything Ellie owned was disgraceful and had no value. But the current regime, due to its soured relationship with the temple, needed her divinity stones, so the only thing the Emperor could do right now was absolve her to get them. Article 1, Paragraph 21. The Empire's law states that if a person was deemed to have made a valuable contribution to the Empire, regardless of who they are, the Emperor can absolve them of their crimes. Since Erhardt set the stage for her, Ellie thought she should play her part. She put on fake tears and squeaked out the words, if I found something valuable, he might not appreciate my gift, your majesty, so I told the temple instead. Please forgive me. Ventus broke out in laughter. He knew he'd been beaten here, and so, in front of everyone, he declared that Lady Ellie's shadow was too exceptional to be kept in her mother's. Promised in the Emperor's name, her shadow would never become longer than it already was. One shadow getting longer meant they became guiltier. The fact the Emperor promised her a short shadow meant the sun would always shine above her head. Ventus then gave his congratulations to Damien on his marriage, and offered him any gift, so long as it was within the ball. And using his quick thinking, Damien asked the Emperor to look into the violet diamonds to prove his wife's innocence. Since ComfyTea was more acquainted with Baron Welsh, Ventus gave the task to her, and then had the guards take the Baron away, along with his daughter. With the whole ordeal wrapping up, Damien went to check on Ellie's face. He told her he didn't like people disrespecting her and her being okay with it because it made him feel like the whole world was collapsing around him. They couldn't have this peace for long though, because Prince Matteo would come shouting at her for screwing him over. Damien stepped in, reminding Matteo that his father just absolved her, and with Erhardt stepping in as well, Matteo was all the way out. Erhardt would then call Ellie by her full name, Ellie Amanta Kleider Erhardt Schutz, and pick the two kids up. She was in trouble. He'd pinch her cheek, telling her not to handle all these things on her own. That evening, Emperor Ventus discussed Ellie and her green eyes with ComfyTea. He wondered if ComfyTea's sister Lely had given birth to a child belonging to him or someone else. Where the imperial court gagged and trialed Count Forgel, the jury spoke of how the Pope was still suffering from illness after receiving a divine message during the war 15 years ago. So at today's trial, his representative, Father Remitra, would be standing in for him. Remitra presented his findings in the Welsh mines. All the diamonds were fake jewels made with dark magic that he cleansed using his divine power. ComfyTea put on her act, telling her husband she didn't think Count Forgel was a bad person, but he almost had everyone fooled, knowing he couldn't expose her work with him, thanks to him being gagged. She felt angst. Since Forgel's daughter was dead, losing him would mean there would be no dark mages left in the imperial palace. It was a heavy price for her to pay, but she had to. Erhardt was getting impatient. He didn't understand why the sentencing was taking so long. The use of dark magic was something that jeopardized the safety of the entire empire. If something like this had happened in his domain, he would have gone berserk. and ordered an immediate execution already. Forgel even put his children in danger. Remitra tried to cut the tension by offering Damien God's blessing, but Erhardt couldn't think of anything more pointless than that. So, Remitra apologized and cut to the chase. Count Rico Forgel was declared guilty, and the use of dark magic deserved to be punished for threatening the well-being of the Empire. Ventus then asked to hear what his wife had to say about this, and gritting her teeth, she uttered that she thought he was guilty too. With the matter settled, Ventus settled Count Forgel to death. But before he could declare how the execution would be handled, Erhardt cut in, asking to let his domain handle it, because there was a connection between the Count and the death of Damien's father, Edwin Kleider, and his wife. The royal couple was stunned hearing him say this. When Livia had snuck into his residence, Erhardt had recorded her confession in a visual orb. Emperor Ventus had no choice but to accept his request, fearing that punishing Count Forgel was only the beginning. He had tried to suppress the Empress, only to find an even bigger mountain waiting, and thought if he didn't get rid of Erhardt soon, the prophecy from 15 years ago would come true. Erhardt grabbed the Count's face, telling him he wouldn't kill him completely, because his death belonged to Damien. Outside Schutz's castle, Ellie was waiting for Erhardt to return from the trial. She thought about all the things going in her favor, now since being pardoned by the Emperor at the debutante ball. The once lowly girl who caused trouble was now Duke Schutz's daughter-in-law, who discovered the new divinity stones. The nobles who once ignored her now saw her as a walking lump of gold. They were constantly trying to get on her good side for scraps, and her residence was flooded daily with letters and guests. When Erhardt returned, he asked what she was doing out here in the cold. Even though her maid told her to wait inside, he could see Ellie was being stubborn again, as she rushed to him to say she missed him, and that she knew he'd come back a winner. He'd then tell his men to restrain Rico Forgel in the underground prison, and that if Rico was about to die, to revive him. If he seemed recovered, to torture him again. The Schutz Knights assumed Ellie was so gentle and had no idea what torture was, despite the fact that internally, she was pretty excited Rico was beaten to near death. So she played her part, acting as if none the wiser as she told them the righteous Duke defeating the villain was so cool. After finishing her meal, Ellie quickly dipped out, skipping on dessert so Erhardt could speak to Damien one-on-one. Erhardt was surprised at her maturity, picking up on what he was intending to do without him even asking. He wondered how he should explain this whole thing to Damien. Damien was only finally moving past his trauma. He didn't want to trap him in those nightmares again, but ultimately decided to reveal that Rico Forgel was imprisoned in their estate's dungeon, and that since he was involved in Damien's parents' accident and severely tormented him, he wanted to know if there was any punishment Damien wished to see. Even though Rico hardly looked human at this point after all the beatings, even having his tongue cut so he couldn't speak properly, Damien still wanted to see him with his own eyes. Finding the former Count bloodied and battered, Damien still recognized his face. Before he was sold into slavery, Rico was someone who often visited the shop with his daughter, Livia. This was the man who threw his life into darkness, the man who killed his parents. For punishment, Damien wanted him to live like this, not able to rest in peace. He thanked Erhardt for everything, thinking about how the Duke who closed the gates after losing his wife was now standing against the Imperial Palace and Temple for his sake. Erhardt patted Damien's head, letting him know he was just like his father in every way, except his personality. Erhardt wished Damien had inherited some of his father's shamelessness, and told Damien he was his guardian, and that this was what any adult should do in his place. This made Damien wonder if he became an adult like the Duke, could he protect someone important to him too? He was no longer afraid of simply surviving each day, or the fact that tomorrow would come. And in fact, these blessings in his life made him want to grow up quicker now. Where Ellie was waiting for Damien, she hoped him seeing Rico was going alright. Damien rushed towards her to give a hug and thanked her for everything, with thoughts of never wanting to lose her fresh in his mind. She was his peace. Meanwhile, at the Imperial Palace, ComfyTea was telling Garrett not to be so nervous. She heard he was the one behind the water-soaking pads and Gemuel Salon, and invited him here for a business proposal. She intended to create a new means of transportation, a carriage that moved on its own without a coachman, carrying goods and people. She at this point already requested cooperation from the Magic Tower, and with their help, the workforce needed would be significantly reduced and in turn, lower costs. What she needed from Garrett though was the power of the Divinity Stones. Garrett thought about the fact She also needed a large amount of land for a carriage of this magnitude. So she mentioned that Count Snout of the South was willing to sell his estate. His land had recently been hit hard by floods, and he was on the verge of bankruptcy. Garrett questioned why the Count would sell. A Count should have enough resources to recover. He wondered if the Count had fallen into gambling losses, since he's heard frequent rumors of it. ComfyTea told Garrett not to worry about the flood damage, since she could use the national treasury to cover it. Of course, in her hands, it wouldn't be used for agriculture anymore, but instead as a base for the new transportation business that she wanted to scale across the continent. Garrett worried, knowing if he refused this proposal, he could put Ellie and the people he loved at risk. But what startled him most was that the Empress's proposal didn't sound far-fetched at all. A new means of transport could really change the flow of this land. Meanwhile, Ellie would visit Adelan's home, surprising her with the gift of a divinity stone. It was her father's dream to own one someday. Inside her home, it was full of books. Adelan thought it was probably a bit shabby compared to the ducal manor, but Ellie thought it was amazing. She presumed Adelan and her father had probably read everything here, and Adelan was surprised again. This was the first time she's heard a nice thing about her home since arriving in the Empire. Adelan would offer a book for Ellie to read, and Ellie chose The Story of Rubel. It was a story Adelan's father would read to her all the time. Rubel, a prince of a fallen kingdom, ran away blaming his parents. But after becoming a great hero, he returned home with pride, only to find his parents had long since passed. Adelan, like Rubel, held both love and resentment for her father since the fall of their kingdom. She thought Rubel was such a fool and told Ellie if she was Rubel, she would have never returned home. Why come back only to seek out the ones she once resented? She just couldn't understand. Ellie answered, maybe it's because he loved them that much. Resentment may come later, but the memories of love from childhood tend to last longer. Love is sometimes a feeling that's hard to understand. It shows through actions before you even realize why. The two would be interrupted with Adelan's father entering, the reason why Ellie had come here. He was known to his people as a man who begged the Empire for his life, when in reality, he gave up everything to save his people. He'd later create a great invention that changed the flow of the Empire. He was the former king of the Riven's kingdom. In the original story, Viscount Rivens developed the infinite mana train that connected the Empire and the entire continent. But never obtaining the needed energy source, the divinity stones, he died without completing the train's construction. Afterwards, Adelan, who left home resenting her father, returned as an opera singer and discovered the train's blueprints in her late father's home. Grieving, she tried to fulfill her father's final wish, but due to a lack of capital and resources, she took the Empress's hand, who had been waiting for this moment. The train was completed, but the profits and honor from it all ended up belonging to the Empress. Watching the crowds cheer for ComfyTea, Adelan regretted it, but by then, both her father and all of his legacy had already been lost. The Viscount was somewhat abrupt, asking Ellie what brought her to such a wretched place like his home. He and his daughter would argue. He didn't want her getting involved with imperial nobles, especially the Schutz family, having heard of the Duke's madness. He went mouth agape, hearing Ellie had helped his daughter with the debutante ball, and even gifted them a divinity stone. He questioned Erhardt's motives, accusing the Schutz family of wanting something precious in return. But Ellie assured him they didn't want anything, and to get him to ease up, she let him know she was born a commoner and an orphan, and was thankful Adelan became her first friend in high society. Having heard Rivens used to be a renowned magic nation, she thought a divinity stone might be of help. The Viscount was quiet as he held the stone, and Ellie continued on. She brought up having heard that relations between him and his fallen kingdom's people were not good, but seeing the carefully preserved books, she could feel how much he cherished them. She used the story of Rubel, a man who had never had an honest conversation with his parents. He and they never understood each other's hearts, even until death. But unlike them, here, the Viscount still had a chance. She told him if he didn't speak up, nothing would ever be conveyed. Ellie took her leave for the day, and Adelan escorted her out. The Viscount would sit and look at the story of Rubel, thinking about how since he came to this house, he hadn't had a proper conversation with his daughter, even once. She was a brave child, who never cried even without her mother. He thought with time that everyone would come to understand his feelings, but now realized he was just an incompetent father. When Adelan came back, he admitted there were many things he wasn't honest with her about. The decisions he made as a king after defeat, and just how pathetic of a father he's been. He told her everything. Adelan was shocked to hear the reason the people of their kingdom were able to become citizens of the Empire was because he offered the royal grimoire. She asked why he didn't tell anyone. because his people all resented him without knowing the truth. But for him, he believed a king who failed to protect his country had no excuse. He felt he should have at least been honest with his own daughter. She cried to him, saying she should be the one apologizing, as a daughter who never even tried to understand him. As the two embraced, the Viscount had thoughts of gratefulness towards Ellie for helping him fix his relationship with his one and only daughter. A week later, Ellie received a letter from the Viscount with his apology for being rude and invited her back. Riding her way to the Rivens estate with Garrett, he was fixated on the Empress's offer, still having no idea what to do. Inside, while Garrett and Adeline were bonding over the tea that was only brewed in her homeland, the Viscount bowed in apology to Ellie. He gave her a particular look and mentioned that in his kingdom that produced many magic tools, he gained the ability to read the flow of mana. He explained hers seemed diluted, like someone else's mana was layered over hers. She tried saying she never used magic before, but then remembered Talum saying something about that. If her mana was specialized in beastkin language, then it made sense she never noticed. The Viscount asked about Ellie's mother, because usually when someone had dense mana, it was for one of two reasons. They forcibly took someone else's, or their parents had strong mana. And in particular, Ellie's mana was green colored, like the world tree. He then brought up the Golden Tower, known as the Imperial Treasury. 10 years ago, one of the Emperor's concubines was imprisoned there, who also had green-colored mana, just like Ellie. Ellie's mother had stolen from this treasury, but Ellie had no idea she might have stolen the World Tree's power. While everyone had tea together, Viscount Rivens presented the blueprints for the infinite mana-powered train he developed. This was all going according to Ellie's plan. He'd been working on it all alone because he had no one he could trust, or any money or resources. But now, someone trustworthy was here before him. Any merchant would jump at this chance, but Garrett was conflicted seeing the Empress had proposed the exact same project. Rivens knew his own name attached to the project would be an obstacle, so if Garrett accepted his proposal, the only thing he wanted was for the mana train to be named after his daughter, Adeline. Garrett would call an abrupt end to their meeting, saying he needed to consult with the Duke, and riding back, Ellie noticed he looked down. He'd explain his troubles with the Empress through an allegory, and Ellie immediately picked up he was talking about the flood-damaged Snout territory. She connected the dots over why he seemed so depressed lately, attributing it to the idea that the Empress must be using territorial reform as an excuse to threaten him. She basically answered back in another allegory, telling him that with love, care, sunlight, water, and wind, the land could bloom again any time. In the evening, Erhardt would explain the disaster that happened to the Snout territory was caused by the Empress. Garrett was appalled. He now saw the Empress didn't care about the people there or their well-being. For their sake, Garrett felt he had to create the mana train. Garrett, Heron, and Erhardt talked it over. Erhardt asked what Ellie said about all this, and hearing she had said, "There's nothing that shines more than the flowers close to the ground, and as long as sunlight continues to reach them, with enough care, the flowers could bloom again," he thought back to his late wife, who always used to say things just like that. His madness began taking over. He was breathing and panting hard. Garrett got up to get an aid, but Erhardt stopped him, saying it was nothing serious. He grabbed a sharp object and stabbed himself, and apologized for letting Garrett see him like this. But it was getting worse. At this rate, he believed he might truly go mad. He was concerned that if it continued, he might end up hurting the children, and that it was best to leave the dukedom before that happened. The thought of resting on Yuria came to his mind. He thought living his life after failing to protect her was a punishment in itself. Soon after, Carthia was pissing her father off for potentially damaging Lashonal House's relationship with the church. She'd change his tune by presenting the blueprint for the mana train, saying she proposed the plan to make it to him, since he was in charge of distributing the divinity stones. But she never expected Garrett to turn her down. He explained it was best to check to see if the land could be healed, and thus she had lost her gambit. When he left, she tossed over her teacup, shouting, "How dare he reject my offer!" She called her Snake and commanded him to capture the voice of the Duke's daughter-in-law using a mana stone. With it, she was going to provoke the Duke's madness and force Garrett to work for her. 2 weeks passed. The Schutz Duchy began investing in Riven's mana train project through Garrett, and the Empress, after being rejected, had poured all of the tower's magic tool engineers into her own business. Because of that, they were struggling to find engineers willing to join the mana train project. Ellie was trying her best to think of a solution. Talum and his trio were out, since weapons and magic tools were completely different fields. On top of that, Erhardt suddenly went off on a monster subjugation expedition. In the original story, the Duke never left for subjugation at this time. She wondered if something happened. She'd then receive an unexpected letter from ComfyTea, inviting her to the first prince's birthday banquet. The Empress went out of her way to isolate Ellie during the debutante ball, and now she was throwing a birthday banquet that she never held before. Still, there was someone Ellie was hoping to meet there. Damien then entered, bringing Ellie some good news. The Gemuel Salon's bookings and revenue have shot up. Ellie assumed it was the dresses Clora and Adelan wore, but Damien actually thought it was because of Ellie's. Thinking about how pretty she looked that day made him blush. She wondered what was up with his cute face, and decided to tease him. She leaned her head down, groaning and distraught, saying she felt weak, and that only a kiss from him would cure her. He couldn't believe this. He didn't think that was a proper treatment, so she hit him back with, "Oh, so you don't want to kiss me?" He'd soon give in and give a light peck, then pull away saying, "Happy now?" thinking it was just like that time she kissed him during their wedding. The day came, and a servant told the Empress preparations were complete. The Empress watched Damien and Ellie's arrival for the day of the first prince's banquet. Ellie took notice of the people here not even interested in the first prince, but instead trying to curry favor with the Empress. She was happy to see Garrett scouting for independent magic engineers, in particular, Marquis Lincoln. Then suddenly, another man knocked over a bust. This particular bust was crafted by one of the Marquis's men, so he ordered his servant Nigel to take care of its repair. Originally, Nigel was just the Marquis's servant, but in the story, he soon revealed his talent and gained support. He'd eventually become known as the greatest sculptor. Ellie thought this was her chance, because if the greatest sculptor in the Empire designed the monotrain, it'd be worth a fortune. She'd go up to Nigel and get acquainted, buttering him up quickly into showing her his sculpture of the World Tree. Soon after, she returned to Damien and saw that Prince Fabian was coming her way. She didn't want him to get too close, otherwise she'd lose the opportunity to talk to the person she'd come to meet. She made the excuse she had to use the bathroom and quickly dipped out, leaving Damien to chat with the prince. Fabian would explain he just came towards them to express his gratitude to Ellie for returning his late mother's precious jewel, but Damien saw him as the son of someone who had a hand in killing his parents and tormenting the Duke. It angered him. Even though the first prince insisted on meeting Ellie and giving his gratitude himself, Damien told him because of the second prince's poor opinion of his wife, she might also be afraid of him as well, and offered to deliver Fabian's message in his stead. While pretending to look for the bathroom, Ellie would bait out Rikus, the man tasked by the Empress to capture her voice. She already knew he was a snake beastkin and head of the intelligence guild, pretending to serve the Empress while actually being the first prince's closest ally. Years ago, because of continuous wars, the Snake Beastkin lost their territory and were taken in by Empress ComfyTea. With the ability to transform into snakes, they could move through the pipes within the mansion to gather and deliver knowledge. When Livia said, "The pipe that loves the snake isn't here," she actually was referring to the pipe as the Snake Clan and the snake as the Empress. Rikus tried to make the excuse he was just a humble servant, but it was useless, since Ellie had been speaking in Beastkin the entire time. He then tried threatening to tell the royal family about her speaking Beastkin, so she threatened him back to tell the Empress about the information he selectively leaked to benefit Prince Fabian in the long run. With her edging him out, she decided to make Rikus an offer. She gave him 3 conditions. First, he needed to keep hiding information from the imperial family while protecting her in the process. Second, to take on her requests too. And third, to not betray the Empress because it'd be strange if his attitude suddenly changed. In return, to earn his trust, she'd pay him, and that was enough for him to agree. She'd then learned he was here to record her voice with the purpose of the Empress being able to use it to trigger the Duke's madness at any point. Learning this, Ellie would tell him to find out how the Empress planned to use her voice to trigger his madness, and then stomped on the recording stone. The Empress scolding him would be his punishment for trying to record her voice. Returning to the party, she'd somehow end up in a face-off against the Empress with Garrett. ComfyTea, still being salty about Garrett declining her offer to work together, bestowed a deed that made both him and Ellie the lords of Snout territory. She wished them to take good care of that desolate land. The Duke suddenly busted through the doors, bringing tons of slayed monsters into the mansion. With him covered in blood, he apologized for being late, having only heard of this party recently. ComfyTea seemed reasonably upset that he was causing chaos in the Imperial Palace. So he replied, "Since you seem to wish for me to go mad, I thought you'd welcome me if I arrived like this. Seems like I was mistaken." And since he was causing a disturbance, he decided to return home with his children. With his cursed madness that only calmed when seeing blood, even he couldn't tell when it'd erupt. Despite the show he put on their way out, Ellie could clearly see his roughened skin and eyes so weary he looked like he was about to collapse. She knew his madness was getting worse, but seeing it up close broke her heart. She'd express her worry, and so he'd kneel down and promise he was fine, promise he was stronger than she thought. But she knew he'd spend more and more days away from home for their sake, and during that time, other factions of the royal family would aim for them. She felt the need to secure the estate, so no one dared to touch it, even in his absence. Garrett looked depressed, arriving at Snout. Ellie was optimistic, however, seeing their new estate looked a lot better than she expected. They were greeted by Lumen, the steward of Count Snout's estate, and Ellie's group in turn greeted him back. While getting their tour of the place, Ellie asked about the damage to the land and its residents. She wanted to see for herself and personally distribute aid to the people. Lumen would turn smug, telling her there was no need for her to see the people, since she was to reside here, and that handling recovery work was beneath her. Thinking they wouldn't be coming here often anyway, he told them to just skim over the place and be on their way. Garrett couldn't believe this steward was speaking so casually to his lords. Then, they took notice of his shiny face and flabby belly. He looked well-fed and well-rested, contrary to what they heard about the suffering citizens. The servants were probably skimming money off the top of the budget while the Count gambled away. And so, Ellie asked Garrett if they could fire this guy, along with every single one of the estate's staff. At first, she was happy to potentially test the method Damien suggested she use to fix things, but she'd become sad seeing the ruined buildings. Unlike the castle, it was a complete mess here. They'd begin by building shelters for the flood victims and giving the people relief supplies. And if they were injured, they could also see a doctor Garrett had brought from the duchy. Now that everyone was being taken care of, Ellie could finally get to work on the land in peace. Some kids would spot Ellie and Damien working, and the two would explain they were planting trees. More specifically, they were planting Rugel trees to restore the land to its original state. The mana underground would respond to them, enriching the soil quality, and once the trees grew tall, they could also make and sell pads from them. The other kids would join in to help plant, and it made Ellie think about her time in the orphanage. She wondered if the orphans were doing well. She missed them. The following week, when Ellie and Damien returned, they were happy to see fully grown trees. Ellie had to give all the love and thanks to Damien for his idea. The adults and their kids came out to thank Ellie and Damien for their help. But the work wasn't over yet. They had a lot more trees they needed to plant. At the Linkent Marquisate, Sharna was telling her father all about her time at the Gemuel Salon, and about how the staff there told her the tone of the dress Lady Schutz wore didn't suit her at all. Her father, Marquis Linkent, had no idea what she was going on about, as she continued to yap about getting a blue and yellow dress with frills instead. He thought back to Ellie being declared the new master of Snout territory, and he had actually been keeping tabs on the place the entire time through an orb. He noticed the mana that laced the soil decreased very quickly this past week, and wondered how Ellie managed to solve it. He could tell the flood that hit the place was clearly the result of artificial magic, and had been wanting to use his measuring proof to take revenge on ComfyTea. He then decided to take a trip to Snout. It had been a month at this point, and the people there had grown sweet potatoes, corn, pumpkins, and many other vegetables. Thanks to the combination of mana and the trees, the land of Snout quickly became fertile, allowing crops to grow faster than before. The only problem for Ellie was that the people still had no idea she actually owned the place. The previous owner was such a terrible man. She was afraid the distance she worked so hard to close between her and the people would grow again, so she just couldn't say it. Nigel suddenly appeared, catching Ellie off guard initially, but then she remembered in the original story, he made a sculpture related to Snout. Turns out, this place was his hometown. He was, in turn, just as surprised to see her here. She didn't know if it was the hot weather, but she began to sweat a lot, and her strength suddenly left her. She'd quickly collapse in front of everyone. The physician told Garrett it was mana depletion. He blamed himself for failing to notice her health, and thought to report to the Duke at once. But Heron advised against it, since it had only been a month since the Duke calmed his mania. He worried that if Erhardt heard about Ellie's condition, he might lose control again. Nigel would suddenly enter the room to explain his master, Marquis Linkent, was here looking for Garrett. The Marquis noticed that since a month ago, the quality of the land and its people had changed so much. They'd be interrupted by Ellie's arrival, respectfully gracing herself while still being sick. She'd suddenly call for Talon and have him take both Heron and Garrett out of the room, so that way she could speak to the Marquis alone. From what she knew in the original story, the Marquis wanted revenge on the Empress because he was her former lover. But ComfyTea abandoned him. Ellie thought it would have been more interesting if there was some longing he had for her after all this time. But no, he wanted revenge simply because he was betrayed. Questioning the quick growth of the crops, he assumed the only thing that could work this fast was black magic. That's exactly what Ellie wanted to hear, seeing as she had one of the crows bring something she prepared. Lincoln couldn't believe it. It was the letter that he sent to the Duke that informed him about Lady Welsh's fake diamonds. Since Lincoln's daughter was friends with Clara Welsh, she must have been gifted a violet diamond, and seeing it, he likely suspected it was created by black magic under the Empress. So he informed a known enemy of the imperial family, Erhardt. Ellie would expose to him she knew he'd been watching them all along, and that he was Carthia's former lover. He didn't expect that. In return for her not reporting this to the Empress, she wanted him to lend his magic tool technicians, and even guaranteed his revenge. And so, he accepted. Garrett and Heron broke back into the room. Talon couldn't hold them back any longer. But they didn't come alone. Erhardt was here as well, having heard from Damien that Ellie collapsed. She couldn't believe Damien told him. But he was giving a look that said, "This way. You'll rest, Ellie." Erhardt sighed, acknowledging that taking care of the territory was the Lord's job, but that there was also no need for her to drain her own strength. He picked her up, saying if this happened again, the lordship of Snout would be handed over to Garrett alone, and no words would change his mind. Nigel's father dropped his potato, finding out that Ellie was actually the new owner of the territory. He wondered why someone like her would mingle with common folk like them. He thought nobles were only arrogant. And now, the people were starting to think they had the wrong idea. Thinking about how she worked so hard for them to the point of collapsing, they wondered if there was something they could do to help her. After 4 days, Ellie learned Lincoln officially signed to work on a monotrain project through a magic seal with Erhardt. If he ever pulled any tricks, his life would immediately end. Discussing the project, Lincoln would explain the use of Snout offered their hands to help, wanting to serve their little lord, Ellie. She was touched. Heron would explain their next problem. Since the monotrain would serve as transportation connecting the continent, they needed to get permission from each territory's lord to lay its tracks. Ellie solved this by suggesting they only build between here in the south and the western Lincoln territory. It would act as a test run that people would visit Snout to see, and gradually, other nobles would also want tracks in their territory as well. They could even invite a lot of people to its first showcase. Lincoln thought the idea was fine, but with their current manpower, the construction would take about 2 years, assuming no one took breaks. Another obstacle in Ellie's plans. She needed the monotrain to settle within 3 years. That way, when Damien and Erhardt headed off to war 4 years from now, she'd have a foundation to endure on her own. At this rate, her plans would fail. Luckily, Garrett would burst in to inform them that they contacted the orphanages in the southern region. So now they were going to employ all the orphans there at least 16 and older. Everything was solved. Ellie only needed one more thing from Lincoln to top everything off. She'd later be informed by Rikus that Lincoln steered a recent imperial banquet into his talks of how she had revived Snout territory. The other nobles were quite impressed. This would lead to the Emperor and Empress fighting that evening. As thanks for the information, she handed Rikus his payment, and now that he could trust her, he decided to tell her more about Carthia's ability. The reason his clan obeyed the Empress's orders was because back when they lived near the World Tree, the Rationale family raided his ancestors and stole their land. Ellie had no idea. Since this never came up in the novel, the Empress had the power to manipulate his clan's memories through her voice. It was an ancient and rare magic. She likely intended to use Ellie's voice to show Erhardt painful illusions. Ellie wondered why, if the Empress had this kind of power, why didn't she just control everyone already? Turns out, the Empress's power didn't work on people who were baptized. Rikus speculated that the magic wasn't hers to begin with, as it was usually only wielded by minority tribes that lived by the World Tree. Ellie realized Carthia must have killed people and stolen their mana to use the magic for herself. Lincoln would later visit the Temple of Graphius to request a baptism to a child he claimed he had godfathered. Of course, it was just Ellie in disguise. This request was forbidden, even for nobles, but Lincoln swayed the priest in front of them by offering the temple a generous donation. Ellie would begin her baptism by putting her hand in some water, but she didn't feel anything and began to question if this was some kind of scam. While having her pray, the priest noticed that for some reason, divine power wouldn't flow through Ellie. During a purification rite, one normally felt cleansed from within, but in this case, Ellie was already far too pure. It was like pouring water into a bottomless jar. Lincoln was not pleased to hear this, and quickly grabbed Ellie to leave. She left the temple with a lot of questions. She was sure in the original story, Ashabel said it wasn't possible for divine power to not work on someone. She wondered if the particular priest they met was just too weak. But Lincoln would explain the man they met was stronger than most priests, and that the only one that would have more divine power would be High Priest Ramitra. The man possessed enough divine power to rival the Pope himself. Ellie would learn the Pope was still suffering from illness and only recovered once the oracle ended. The last oracle was during the Imperial War 15 years ago, and some interpret him still being sick as the oracle not coming to full fruition yet. But even if he or Ramitra couldn't perform a baptism on Ellie, she was fully prepared with the holy water she pickpocketed from the temple. Seeing as it dispelled Livia's black magic, she hoped it would work on the Empresses too. On another day, while Ellie and Damien had their meal together, she gasped, seeing he had gotten a lot taller, and wondered why she wasn't growing. Franz would present Erhard a letter, and the Duke immediately commanded him to burn it. Franz would then accidentally drop it, so Ellie would go to pick it up and find out it was from the Marsif family. The first family that adopted her, treated her with some love and care, but disowned her once they found out she was the daughter of a thief. She brought up the fact that because these people disowned her, she was able to meet Erhard and Damien and have a wonderful life here. She was grateful for that. She pleaded with Erhard to let her read it, and after enough begging, he finally gave in. The Marsif family was inviting her to a charity event they were hosting. They were aligned with the Empress, so Erhard thought it was obvious they were plotting something. Ellie remembered in the original story, Count Marsif took part in the Empress's transportation business, so he was probably looking to tarnish Garrett's honor in some way. She decided to go, since Garrett was sponsoring some orphanages in the Marsif territory, and it made her think of all the kids back at her orphanage. A week later, Ellie arrived at the event. She knew it would be grand with the Empress's touch, but she didn't expect them to invite people from other kingdoms across the continent. She spotted Erhard getting swarmed by people. He was practically a celebrity here. An older woman would then bump into her, and it was exactly who she was looking for. This woman was Clovis Rudia, a famous book writer who established the system of herbology currently used by everyone. The two would chat and make pleasantries, until a girl grabbed Ellie from behind, and behind her stood Sister Vivian and Brother Roxy from the Marsif family. Vivian apologized to Ellie for her family sending her off, which seemed pretty inauthentic, considering the siblings would look down and harass Ellie for being an orphan all the time. Ellie expected them to be here, but never thought they'd act so shameless. Damien would cut in and tell them to address him and Ellie as Lord and Lady Schutz. No first names. The siblings would try their best to embarrass Ellie in front of Clovis, but Ellie would remind them of the time she tried to bring them dessert, and she accidentally spilt it. Vivian had gotten so angry at her that day. Clovis couldn't believe the siblings worked Ellie like a servant, and by the end of it, no one wanted to talk to the Marsif siblings. They were pissed. While enjoying treats, Ellie would notice someone in the crowd, and going to see this person, she was surprised it was Betty. Ellie would learn Count Marsif was sponsoring Betty, along with several other children, who seemed really sweaty for some reason. She would check Betty, and noticed Betty had several layers of clothing on. The Count was dressing them like this to fool people into thinking they were well cared for, because if they looked plump, people would assume they were well fed. Ellie was enraged. Count Marsif, meanwhile, was wondering what was taking his children so long. He assumed they were taking care of Ellie like before, and thought his daughter was too kind for her own good. He'd come across Erhard and thank him for attending, but Erhard answered he only came here because of Ellie, and that there was no misfortune worse than speaking to someone who treated their children like tools. Marsif was embarrassed in front of everyone. One of the servants would tell the Count the auction was ready to begin, but when Marsif asked for his daughter, she apparently stepped out, saying something had come up. Roxy, meanwhile, was so distressed from Ellie humiliating him earlier, he got completely drunk. Marsif and his son would begin the auction, announcing all proceeds would be put into supporting the orphanages, and thanking everyone for their support. But his son would get so sick from drinking too much, he would kick him off the stage. Roxy was seething, just thinking about how nothing was going right today. He thought it was all because of Ellie. But that wasn't the end of things. All of the orphans seemed sickly with stomach pain. Marsif's wife would try to help Betty, but Ellie would say it was because they weren't being fed, turning towards Roxy as the one to blame. Alright, that's where it ends for now. When I began this series, I thought we were going to get a time skip, so my bad. Maybe we'll get one by the next time I decide to cover this series again. How do you feel about it though? Do you want me to continue it? Subscribe for more content. But for now, watch this next video. It's me, ComfyTea. I'll see you all in the next one.